My name is Kiara, and at 32 years old, I learned that the people who preach the loudest about family values are usually the ones hiding the darkest secrets. My husband Darren brought his mother, Mama Vivian, to our house immediately after her terminal cancer diagnosis. The very next week, he packed his designer luggage for a 9-month corporate assignment, leaving me to be her sole caregiver. While her own flesh and blood ignored her agonizing decline, I was the one holding her hand through every brutal round of chemotherapy. But right before she took her final breath, she pulled me close and gave me a terrifying instruction. She told me to dig in the kitchen corner under the old stoneware pickle jar. I was shocked when I found out what she was hiding, and it became the weapon I used to destroy them all. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family who underestimated your worth and tried to walk all over your sacrifices. The heavy, humid Atlanta air mixed with the rich scent of buttermilk fried chicken, baked macaroni and cheese, and braised collard greens with smoked turkey. It was the afternoon of Mama Vivian's repast, the traditional gathering after the funeral held at her beautiful, historic home. I had been awake for 48 straight hours. My catering company, Soul and Spice, had prepared the entire feast from scratch. I did not charge the family a single dime. I chopped, seasoned, and baked through my own immense grief, desperately wanting to honor the woman who had become more of a mother to me than my own ever was. My feet ached inside my sensible black shoes. My eyes were swollen from crying, and my mourning dress felt like a lead weight against my exhausted body. I stood near the grand dining room archway, watching the extended congregation from the local megachurch load up their premium paper plates. Nobody thanked me. Nobody asked how I was holding up after 9 grueling months of changing bedpans, tracking complex medication schedules, and watching a vibrant, powerful woman wither away into nothing. I was just reaching for a glass of ice water to soothe my dry throat when a heavy black plastic trash bag slammed onto the immaculate lace tablecloth right next to my silver catering trays. The loud smack silenced the entire room instantly. Forks stopped clinking against porcelain. Whispers died down. I slowly turned my head and saw my sister-in-law, Tasha. She was wearing a custom black designer dress that probably cost more than the commercial oven in my kitchen, accessorized with an oversized diamond cross necklace that caught the chandelier light. Her face perfectly contoured and baked with expensive makeup, twisted into a cruel and dismissive sneer. She did not look like a grieving daughter who had just buried her mother. She looked like a predator who had finally cornered her prey. "Pack your things right now, Kiara," Tasha said, her voice carrying loudly and intentionally across the silent, crowded room. "Make sure you get all your cheap pots and pans out of the kitchen today. Darren is flying back tonight, and he does not want you or your smelly food in this house when he gets here." I stared at her, my mind struggling to process the sheer audacity of her words. "What are you talking about, Tasha?" I asked, keeping my voice as steady as possible. "This is my home, too. I just buried your mother 2 hours ago." Tasha let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed off the hardwood floors. "Your home," she scoffed loudly. "Please. You were just the hired help, and now your nursing shift is officially over. Darren instructed his lawyers to send the divorce papers to your little catering business this morning. He is completely done with you, and quite frankly, this family is done with you. Grab your trash bag and leave before you make a bigger scene." The humiliation burned my cheeks as dozens of eyes stared at me. Church members, distant cousins, and nosy neighbors watched me being discarded like a piece of spoiled meat. I looked around the room for anyone to step in and say this was entirely inappropriate. I had spent the last 9 months begging Tasha to come visit her dying mother, only to be told she was too busy with church events and social galas. Now she was kicking me out of the house I had kept running. Instead of an ally, DeAndre, Tasha's husband, and the esteemed youth pastor of their affluent church stepped forward. He adjusted his perfectly tailored suit jacket and put on his best sympathetic pastoral voice. It was the exact fake tone he used to manipulate his congregation every Sunday morning. "Now, Kiara, let us handle this transition with grace," DeAndre said, placing a heavy and condescending hand on my shoulder. The good book tells us that a foolish woman tears down her own house with her hands. You have served your temporary purpose during Vivian's illness, and we appreciate your charity. But we must be honest with ourselves today. You never truly fit into the Thompson family legacy. This historic home represents generational wealth. It belongs to the true bloodline. Darren needs a wife who aligns with his high corporate status, not someone who comes home smelling like fried onions and bleach. Pray on it, sister. The Lord will guide you to a path more suited for your lowly station in life. I aggressively shrugged his hand off my shoulder, utterly disgusted by the false piety radiating from his pores. You certainly did not mind the smell of my onions when I was funding your youth ministry retreats out of my business accounts last summer. DeAndre, I said, my voice eerily calm, despite the massive rage boiling in my chest. And Tasha, you definitely did not mind my cheap pots and pans when I was feeding the mother you cowardly refused to visit for 9 straight months. Tasha stepped closer, her perfectly manicured acrylic finger pointing just inches from my face. Do not you dare try to guilt-trip me in front of my church family, she hissed. I was too emotionally devastated to see my mother in that weak state. Darren and I are the real victims here. We lost our mother. All you lost was a free place to stay and a meal ticket. Now take your trash bag and get out before I have my husband call the police and physically escort you off our ancestral property. Every instinct in my exhausted body screamed at me to drag Tasha across that expensive lace tablecloth. I wanted to scream, to cry, to break down and demand absolute justice for the 9 months of my life I had sacrificed for them. I had completely paused my business expansion plans. I had drained my own personal savings to buy Mama Vivian's specialized out-of-pocket medications when Darren conveniently claimed his bank accounts were temporarily frozen due to his overseas assignment. I had loved that old woman with my whole heart, and this was my grand reward. To be publicly humiliated, stripped of my marriage, and thrown onto the street just hours after watching her heavy casket get lowered into the Georgia clay. I looked at the faces of the extended family surrounding us. They all quickly averted their eyes, silently siding with the golden child daughter and the wealthy absentee son. They actually believed I was the villain in this story. They actually believed I was nothing but a gold-digging stepping stone, a convenient and free nursemaid who was now overstaying her welcome in their elite circle. Darren had clearly planned this. He had orchestrated this entire divorce and eviction while I was busy holding a cold washcloth to his mother's forehead. But I did not cry. I refused to give Tasha the satisfaction of seeing me break down in front of her audience. Because as I looked at Tasha's gloating face and DeAndre's smug, judgmental posture, the memory of last night washed over me with intense clarity. The memory of Mama Vivian's fragile, bony fingers gripping my wrist with a surprising and desperate strength. Her breathing had been incredibly shallow, rattling painfully in her chest, but her dark eyes were piercing and completely lucid. "They are going to try and bury you, Kiara?" Mama Vivian had whispered in the dark bedroom, coughing weakly. "My children are greedy, blind, and cruel. I see it now. I see clearly what Darren has been doing behind your back. Do not let them take your crown. When I am gone, I need you to go down to the basement pantry. You dig in the kitchen corner right under the heavy stoneware pickle jar. The old one my grandmother brought up from Savannah. Everything you need to destroy their lies is inside a metal box. Take it, use it, and do not ever look back." I blinked, pulling myself back to the brutal present moment. Tasha was still smirking at me, waiting for a pathetic and emotional reaction. She fully expected me to beg. She expected me to fall to my knees and plead for my marriage, for my home, and for my dignity. Instead, I simply reached down, grabbed the black plastic trash bag off the table, and offered Tasha a chillingly sweet smile that made her flinch. "You know what, Tasha?" I said, my voice dripping with dark amusement. "You are absolutely right. I will pack my things right now. Just give me 1 hour to clear my catering equipment out of the kitchen downstairs. After all, I would not want to leave any of my cheap mess behind for Darren's grand return to his castle." Without waiting for her confused reply, I turned on my heel and walked straight toward the kitchen, firmly locking the heavy oak door behind me. My heart pounded a frantic and wild rhythm against my ribs as I completely bypassed the commercial stoves and headed straight for the creaky basement stairs. The games were over. Darren and Tasha thought they had played a perfect hand of cards against a defenseless woman. They had no idea I was about to flip the entire table. It was time to see exactly what kind of war Mama Vivian had prepared me for. The basement stairs groaned under my weight as I descended into the cool dampness of the cellar. I flicked on the pull-chain light bulb hanging from the exposed wooden rafters. It cast a harsh yellow glow over my stainless steel prep tables, my commercial-grade convection ovens, and my massive walk-in refrigerators. I had built soul and spice down here, transforming Mama Vivian's massive, unused storage cellar into a fully certified commercial kitchen. Every dime I had made in my 20s was invested into this space. But I did not care about my expensive stand mixers or my imported spice racks right now. I walked straight past my empire toward the back corner of the original pantry. This section of the basement still had the original dirt and brick foundation from when the house was built over a century ago. Sitting in the darkest corner, resting on a thick, rotting wooden pallet, was the massive stoneware pickle jar. It was a heavy, salt-glazed clay antique that Mama Vivian's grandmother had brought up from Savannah during the Great Migration. Nobody had moved it in decades. It was practically a structural fixture of the house, surrounded by thick cobwebs and years of undisturbed dust. I knelt on the cold concrete. My silk morning dress scraped against the rough floor, picking up dirt, but I did not care. I wrapped my arms around the cold, textured clay of the jar and pulled. It was incredibly heavy, filled with sand and old masonry to weigh it down. I gritted my teeth, planted my feet firmly against the brick wall for leverage, and shoved the jar to the side with a loud, grating, scraping sound. Underneath the wooden pallet, the floor was uneven. There was a loose wooden plank completely hidden by the dark shadow of the jar. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs. Mama Vivian was not hallucinating in her final hours. She was directing me to a hidden vault. I wedged my fingernails under the edge of the damp wood and pulled it up. A wave of musty, ancient air hit my face. Lying in the shallow dirt cavity between the foundation stones was a rusted metal lockbox. It looked like an old military surplus container, heavy and olive green, with a small mechanical combination dial on the front. I pulled it out, brushing the damp earth off the top. Mama Vivian had not given me a code before she passed. I stared at the dial, my mind racing through birth dates and anniversaries. Then I remembered her favorite Bible verse, the one she made Darren recite every single Sunday before dinner without fail. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. I spun the rusted dial to 305. The lock clicked open with a sharp, heavy snap that echoed in the empty kitchen. I lifted the heavy metal lid. Inside, resting on a bed of yellowed newspaper, were 3 specific items: a small black burner phone, a thick leather-bound ledger book, and a heavy manila envelope securely sealed with red wax and stamped with the insignia of the most prominent corporate law firm in Atlanta. My hands trembled as I reached for the thick ledger first. I opened it to the first page. The handwriting was unmistakably Mama Vivian's elegant, sweeping cursive. But this was not a diary of her feelings. It was a meticulous, ruthless financial record. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning neat columns of dates, property addresses, and massive dollar amounts. As I read closer, I realized exactly what I was looking at. These were off-the-books real estate tax liens and private loans. Mama Vivian had been quietly buying up the distressed debts of dozens of commercial properties across the city for the last 20 years. She was not just a sweet, passive old church lady living in a paid-off historic home. She was a silent, calculating real estate mogul. And looking at the names attached to these properties, she owned the financial souls of half the people sitting upstairs in her dining room right now. Even DeAndre's multi-million-dollar church expansion project was listed here, alongside a staggering number indicating a massive private loan she had secretly floated him under the table to save him from a bank audit. I set the ledger down, my mind spinning with the sheer magnitude of the leverage I was holding. Next, I picked up the sealed legal envelope. Across the front, written in bold black permanent marker, were the words, For Kiara, only to be opened in the event of my death. I ran my thumb over the raised wax seal, but I did not open it yet. I needed to know the full scope of the battlefield before I unleashed whatever legal nuclear bomb was waiting inside that envelope. Finally, I picked up the black burner phone. It was fully charged, which meant someone had been maintaining it recently. Probably Mama Vivian herself, right up until the cancer spread to her bones and she became fully bedridden. I held down the power button. The screen lit up with a harsh glare in the dim basement. There was no passcode lock. I opened the messaging application. There was only one active thread labeled with a single letter, D. Darren. I clicked on the thread. What I saw made the blood completely freeze in my veins. It was a complete backup of Darren's text messages, somehow mirrored or forwarded to this untraceable device. Mama Vivian had either hired a high-end private investigator, or she had somehow gained access to his cloud account. Either way, she had been reading her own son's messages for months. I scrolled up to the top, my eyes scanning the brutal, unfiltered truth of my 11-year marriage. The group texts were between Darren, his sister Tasha, and a contact saved simply as Chloe. I read a message sent from Darren to Tasha 6 months ago, right in the middle of Mama Vivian's most aggressive and painful chemotherapy cycle. Darren wrote, "The oncologist says she probably only has a few months left at best. Are the estate lawyers ready with the deed transfer for the house? I cannot keep playing the dutiful son from across town much longer. This commute is killing me." Tasha replied, "Everything is totally set on my end. Just keep Kiara playing the devoted nurse. She is saving us thousands of dollars a week in private hospice healthcare costs. Have you looked at the new townhouse for Chloe yet?" I felt a physical, violent wave of nausea wash over my entire body. I clamped a hand over my mouth to stifle a scream that threatened to tear out of my throat. A townhouse. For Chloe. Who the hell was Chloe? I kept scrolling frantically, my vision blurring with hot, angry tears. I found a string of direct messages between Darren and Chloe. Dozens of photos loaded onto the small screen. I clicked on one. It was Darren standing in a luxurious modern kitchen, his arms wrapped lovingly around a beautiful light-skinned woman with a massive, swelling, pregnant belly. Chloe wrote, "Our baby boy is kicking so hard today. When are you going to finally kick the caterer out? I want to move into the main historic house before he is born, so we can set up the nursery in the big room." Darren replied, "As soon as the old lady flatlines, I am serving Kiara the divorce papers. The house is entirely mine. You and our beautiful son will have the master suite. Just be patient." My love, her time is almost up. I dropped the phone into my lap, gasping for air, as if someone had just punched me squarely in the chest. 9 months. For 9 consecutive months, Darren was not on a high-profile corporate assignment in Dubai building his career. He was living 20 miles away in the affluent Atlanta suburbs with his pregnant mistress. And Tasha knew everything. DeAndre probably knew everything too. They all knew. They let me wash Mama Vivian's soiled sheets, spoon-feed her warm broth, and cry myself to sleep from sheer physical exhaustion, all while they laughed at my blind loyalty and carefully planned my eviction. I looked at the rusted lockbox, then at the heavy pickle jar, and finally at the expensive commercial kitchen I had built with my own 2 hands and my own life savings. They did not just want to divorce me and move on. They wanted to financially erase me. They wanted to use my free physical labor to protect their inheritance, drain my bank accounts to pay for her care, and then throw me out like the garbage bag Tasha had just slammed on my catering table upstairs. A profound, icy calm suddenly settled over my mind. The hot tears stopped falling. The heavy, suffocating grief I had felt all morning completely evaporated, replaced instantly by a cold, highly calculating fury. Mama Vivian knew exactly what was happening. She watched her own privileged son betray his devoted wife, and she used her dying breath to hand me the ultimate sword. She gave me the ledger, the mirrored phone, and the legal envelope because she knew I was the only person in this family strong enough to burn their false, hypocritical empire to the ground. I carefully packed the burner phone, the leather ledger, and the sealed legal envelope into my oversized leather tote bag. I zipped it completely shut, making sure absolutely nothing was visible from the outside. Then I quickly stood up and pushed the loose dirt and the wooden floorboard back into its original place. I dragged the heavy stoneware pickle jar back over the hidden compartment, using my shoe to wipe away any fresh scuff marks on the concrete floor. I took a deep, shuddering breath, smoothing down the wrinkled front of my black morning dress. I walked over to my stainless steel prep tables and began loudly throwing a few of my heavy chef knives and metal spatulas into a plastic crate, making exactly enough noise to prove to anyone listening upstairs that I was doing exactly what I was told. I was packing up my cheap pots and pans. Just as I secured the tight plastic lid on the crate, a dark shadow fell across the small basement window near the ceiling. I paused, looking up at the narrow rectangular pane of glass that peeked out at ground level toward the front circular driveway. The familiar low hum of a luxury engine vibrated through the thin glass. Heavy tires crunched loudly on the gravel. I stepped onto a small wooden stepping stool to get a better view through the dusty window pane. Darren's sleek black-tinted Range Rover pulled perfectly into the pristine driveway, parking right behind DeAndre's car. My heart turned to pure stone. The prodigal son had finally returned home for his unearned crown. I watched his polished Italian leather shoes step out of the driver's side. He adjusted the cuffs of his expensive tailored suit, looking every bit the successful, heartbroken executive returning to mourn his beloved mother. But he did not walk straight toward the front door to greet his waiting family. Instead, he walked around the front grille of the vehicle to the passenger side and pulled the heavy door open. A woman stepped out onto the gravel. She was wearing a tight designer black maternity dress that unapologetically hugged a very obvious, very large 8-month baby bump. It was Chloe. Darren took her hand delicately, kissed her forehead right there in the open daylight, and pointed up at the massive historic house with a proud, deeply possessive smile. He was bringing his pregnant mistress directly to his mother's repast. I stood frozen on the stepping stool in the basement, my hands gripping the dusty window frame so hard my knuckles turned white. He was bringing his pregnant mistress directly to his mother's repast. The sheer, unadulterated disrespect of it all took my breath away for a fraction of a second. But only a fraction. The lockbox was heavy in my leather tote bag. The power dynamic had already shifted, even if they were entirely oblivious to it. I stepped down from the stool, slung the heavy bag over my shoulder, and walked up the wooden stairs. I pushed open the heavy oak door just in time to hear the front entrance swing wide open. The lively chatter of the dining room stopped instantly. Darren stood in the grand foyer. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, looking every bit the affluent, grieving executive. He let out a deep theatrical sigh, wiping an imaginary tear from his eye. But the performance barely lasted 3 seconds, because right behind him, stepping into the foyer with an air of absolute entitlement, was Chloe. She placed a manicured hand on her swelling stomach, looking around the historic home like she was inspecting a property she had just purchased at auction. Darren cleared his throat, his voice projecting through the silent house. "Family friends." He began, his tone dripping with forced solemnity. "Today is a dark day for the Thompson family. We have lost our matriarch, but the Lord takes and the Lord gives. Mama Vivian wanted this house to remain full of life and love. So today, I am not just mourning. I am bringing the future of this family into our ancestral home. I want you all to welcome Chloe, the mother of my soon-to-be-born son, the new heir to the Thompson legacy." A collective gasp rippled through the church congregation. Older women clutched their pearls. Deacons exchanged shocked glances. Bringing a pregnant mistress to a funeral dinner while the wife who nursed the deceased was still in the house was a level of scandal that even this wealthy neighborhood had never seen. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms, waiting to see exactly how deep the rot in this family went. I did not have to wait long. Tasha pushed her way to the front of the crowd. Instead of slapping her brother for disrespecting their mother's funeral, she let out a delighted squeal. She rushed forward and wrapped her arms around Chloe, carefully avoiding the baby bump. "You made it," Tasha gushed loudly, making sure everyone could hear her. "Oh my goodness, look at how big he is getting. I told you the master suite upstairs gets the best morning light for the nursery." DeAndre was right behind his wife. He offered Darren a firm, masculine handshake and a warm embrace. Brother, the Lord works in mysterious ways, DeAndre boomed, using his signature pastoral cadence to smooth over the blatant adultery. We must embrace the new life God has blessed you with during this season of grief. Welcome to the family, Chloe. They knew. They had all known for months. They had probably sat around this very dining room table eating the food I cooked, laughing about the naive caterer washing bedpans upstairs, while Darren played house in the suburbs. The confirmation was a physical blow, but the anger was a fantastic shield. Darren finally turned his head and locked eyes with me. The fake pious smile instantly vanished from his face, replaced by a cold, hard glare. He let go of Chloe's hand and marched across the foyer, stopping just inches from where I stood. He towered over me, using his physical size to try and intimidate me, a tactic he had relied on for 11 years. "What are you still doing here, Kiara?" Darren demanded, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper, meant only for me. "Tasha texted me that you were packing your bags an hour ago. I told you I wanted you out before I arrived." I looked him up and down, feeling absolutely nothing but disgust. A year ago, this man's disapproval would have sent me into a panic. Today, he just looked like a pathetic, arrogant fool walking into a trap he built himself. "I am leaving, Darren," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "I just needed to grab a few personal items." Darren sneered, his eyes darting toward the basement door behind me. "Personal items. Right. Listen to me very carefully, Kiara. You are going to walk out that front door right now with exactly what you came into this marriage with. Nothing. You are leaving all the catering equipment downstairs. The ovens, the refrigerators, the prep tables, all of it stays." I raised an eyebrow. "My equipment is legally registered to my LLC, Darren. You do not own Soul and Spice." "I own this house," he snapped back, his face turning red. "And you have been operating your little side hustle out of my basement, rent-free, for years. We can call your cheap pots and pans fair compensation for the utility bills you racked up if you try to take a single mixer out of this house. I will have my lawyers tie you up in court so long your business will go bankrupt before you ever cater another party. Now get out. Chloe needs to rest, and she does not want to look at you." From across the room, Chloe offered a sickeningly sweet smile, gently rubbing her belly. It was the ultimate display of female cruelty, a silent victory lap over the discarded wife. I felt the heavy weight of the leather tote bag on my shoulder, the burner phone, the ledger, the new will. I had enough ammunition in this single bag to ruin his life, his credit, and his freedom. Arguing over a convection oven was beneath me now. I let out a soft, genuine laugh that seemed to completely unnerve him. "You can keep the ovens, Darren." I smiled. "Consider it a housewarming gift for you and your new family. I hope you both enjoy the basement. It gets a little drafty in the winter." Darren blinked, clearly confused by my lack of resistance. He expected screaming. He expected tears. He expected me to beg for my commercial kitchen. My calm surrender threw him entirely off balance. He stepped aside, gesturing aggressively toward the front door. I turned and grabbed my single small rolling suitcase that I had packed earlier that morning. I did not say goodbye to the church members who stared at me with pity. I did not acknowledge Tasha's victorious smirk. I simply walked through the grand foyer, my head held high, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. I passed right by Chloe, close enough to smell her expensive floral perfume. "Make sure you leave the keys on the console table, Kiara," Chloe said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Oh, keep them," I replied without breaking my stride. "You are going to need all the help you can get opening these doors soon." I walked out of the massive front doors and stepped into the blistering afternoon sun. I loaded my small suitcase into the trunk of my modest sedan and slid into the driver's seat. As I started the engine, I looked back at the house one last time. The Thompson ancestral home. A beautiful facade hiding generations of deceit and financial rot. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully amputated the dead weight. I pulled out of the long, winding driveway and merged onto the main road, leaving the affluent neighborhood behind. The silence in my car was deafening, but it was peaceful. I drove for exactly 2 miles before pulling into the empty parking lot of a strip mall. I shifted the car into park, reached into my heavy leather tote bag, and pulled out the black burner phone. It was time to fire the first warning shot. DeAndre had stood in that foyer invoking the name of God to justify his brother-in-law's adultery. He loved playing the righteous shepherd to his wealthy flock. He loved the power, the prestige, and the tax-exempt lifestyle that came with being the head youth pastor at a church that pulled in millions of dollars in weekly tithes. But Mama Vivian's ledger had shown me exactly how DeAndre maintained his luxurious lifestyle. I opened the messaging application on the burner phone. I did not need to search for the contact information of the church's senior board members. As a caterer who had planned dozens of their high-profile charity galas, I had all their personal cell phone numbers memorized. I created a new group chat, adding the head deacon, the chief financial officer of the church, and the senior pastor. I typed out a single precise message. If the church board is wondering why the Youth Ministry Expansion Fund is suddenly running a massive deficit this quarter, you should demand a full audit of Pastor DeAndre's recent credit card statements. Specifically, the charges made at Cartier on the 5th of last month and the private charter flight to Miami, booked under his wife's name. The Lord sees all things, but the IRS demands receipts. Do not let a false prophet bankrupt your congregation. I read the message twice. It was entirely true. I had seen the exact transaction records detailed in Mama Vivian's flawless handwriting cross-referenced with text messages between Tasha and Darren bragging about the trip. DeAndre was embezzling church funds to keep his high-maintenance wife happy, and Mama Vivian had been quietly covering his tracks with private loans just to prevent a public family scandal. But Mama Vivian was dead now. The protection was gone. I hit send. I watched the small green arrow confirm the delivery. I tossed the burner phone onto the passenger seat and put the car back into drive. Tasha wanted to throw my belongings out in a trash bag. Darren wanted to steal my business equipment. DeAndre wanted to preach about my lowly station in life. Let them enjoy their dinner. Let them celebrate their stolen house by tomorrow morning. The holy sanctuary they hid behind was going to burn to the ground. And I was just getting started. The drive toward my temporary rental kitchen gave me time to process the sheer velocity of the day's events. Just 12 hours ago, I was holding a damp sponge to the forehead of a dying woman. Now I was a divorced homeless caterer armed with the financial blueprints to destroy a dynasty. My phone buzzed in my purse. It was my own personal cell phone this time. A text from my sous chef reminding me that we had the mayor's gala prep starting at 4 in the morning tomorrow. Life did not stop for heartbreak. I had a business to run. I had a reputation to uphold. Darren thought stripping me of my commercial kitchen would break my spirit and bankrupt my LLC. He vastly underestimated my work ethic. I had built soul and spice from a single folding table at a farmer's market. I did not need his basement to succeed. I just needed my recipes in my own two hands. I glanced over at the leather bag resting on the passenger seat. The sealed envelope with the corporate law firm insignia seemed to radiate a strange heat. I was tempted to rip it open right there in the car, but I held back. Mama Vivian was a master chess player. If she had sealed that envelope, she meant for it to be opened at the exact right moment in front of the exact right audience. I needed to wait for the official will reading. I needed Darren to fully commit to his arrogance. I needed him to sign those divorce papers and legally sever himself from me before I revealed the hand I was holding. My car engine hummed as I navigated through the heavy Atlanta traffic. I pictured DeAndre's phone buzzing in his pocket while he was busy shaking hands and blessing plates of food. I pictured the senior pastor pulling him aside into a quiet hallway, demanding an explanation for the anonymous text. The panic would set in slowly. DeAndre would rush home frantically checking his bank statements, screaming at Tasha for being careless with the church credit cards. The unified front they presented in the foyer would begin to crack under the pressure of their own greed. They thought I was just a naive girl who cooked their meals and washed their dishes. They never realized that while I was quietly serving them, I was also watching them. I knew their weaknesses. I knew their vanities. And thanks to the woman they abandoned, I now had the keys to their destruction. I pressed my foot down on the gas pedal, feeling a small, dangerous smile spread across my face. The mourning period was officially over. It was time to go to war. 2 weeks had passed since the day I walked out of Mama Vivian's house, leaving my commercial kitchen and my cheating husband behind. I had not wasted a single minute feeling sorry for myself. I rented a high-end commercial kitchen space downtown, moving my entire Soul and Spice operation into a pristine, steel-lined facility that was actually twice the size of the basement I had left behind. My sous chef and my prep team rallied behind me, working grueling 14-hour shifts to ensure we did not miss a single client commitment. The work was exhausting, but it was the kind of exhaustion that built empires, not the kind that came from carrying someone else's dead weight. We were in the middle of our most critical week of the year. Soul and Spice had been selected to cater the annual Mayor's Charity Gala, a massive 500-person event that would solidify my company as the premier catering service in Atlanta. I had sunk a significant portion of my working capital into securing the finest ingredients: Wagyu beef, imported truffles, fresh Maine lobster, and massive quantities of high-end champagne. Every detail had to be absolutely flawless. My team was humming with focused energy, prepping the delicate hors d'oeuvres when my cell phone rang. It was my bank manager, Mr. Henderson. I wiped my flour-covered hands on my apron and answered, expecting him to confirm the wire transfer for the final floral vendor payment. Instead, his voice sounded strained and deeply uncomfortable. "Kiara, I am so sorry to call you with this news," he began, clearing his throat nervously. "We just received an emergency court order from a legal team representing Darren and Tasha Thompson. They have filed a civil suit against you, alleging corporate theft and elder financial abuse." I froze, a cold dread washing over me. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, stepping away from the loud hum of the commercial refrigerators. "I have not touched a single dime of their money." According to the filing, Mr. Henderson explained, his tone apologetic but firm. "They discovered that Vivian Thompson's primary checking and savings accounts were completely empty upon her passing. Given that you were her primary caregiver, they are officially accusing you of illegally siphoning her assets into your catering business accounts before she died. As a result, the judge has placed a temporary emergency freeze on all of your Soul and Spice business accounts, pending an investigation." My heart slammed against my ribs. A freeze. They froze my business accounts right in the middle of the mayor's gala prep week. This meant I could not pay my vendors. I could not pay my staff. I could not purchase the final round of fresh produce needed for tomorrow night's dinner service. Darren and Tasha had realized the money was gone, and because they were entirely clueless about Mama Vivian's secret financial empire and her hidden trust, they immediately assumed I had stolen the loose cash to fund my business. They were trying to bankrupt me, right before the biggest night of my career. "I cannot run my business with frozen accounts, Mr. Henderson," I said, fighting to keep the panic out of my voice. "I have a major event tomorrow. I need access to my operating capital right now. Is there any way around this?" "I am so sorry, Kiara," he replied softly. "My hands are completely tied. It is a court order. Only a judge can lift the freeze. And you will not be able to get a hearing for at least a week." I ended the call, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and sheer terror. Darren had explicitly threatened to tie me up in court until my business went under, and he was making good on that promise. He and Tasha were probably sitting in that stolen house right now, toasting with cheap wine, fully believing they had just successfully crushed me. They thought I would be forced to cancel on the mayor, ruining my professional reputation forever. But they did not know about the heavy rusted metal lockbox sitting securely in the trunk of my car. I took a deep breath, forcing the panic down. I untied my apron, tossed it onto a prep table, and told my sous chef I would be back in an hour. I marched out to my car, opened the trunk, and pulled out Mama Vivian's leather-bound ledger. I sat in the driver's seat, flipping through the thick pages until I found exactly what I was looking for. Mama Vivian had kept meticulous notes on everyone she did business with. She knew the financial sins of half the city. I ran my finger down a column of names until I landed on one specific entry: Ronald Henderson, the very bank manager who had just frozen my accounts. According to Mama Vivian's flawless handwriting 10 years ago, Mr. Henderson had made a massive, highly illegal error that almost cost the bank millions. He was facing immediate termination and potential federal charges. Mama Vivian, who held significant sway as one of their oldest and wealthiest private clients, had personally intervened. She pulled a few massive strings, covered a substantial financial shortfall with a private off-the-books loan and saved his entire career. In exchange, he owed her a debt of absolute unquestioning loyalty. A debt that was clearly documented, complete with photocopies of the compromising internal bank emails she had saved as leverage. I smiled, a slow, dangerous curve of my lips. Darren wanted to play dirty. He wanted to use the legal system as a weapon against a hard-working woman. It was time to show him what real leverage looked like. I drove straight to the bank, marching past the tellers and directly into Mr. Henderson's plush glass-walled office without knocking. He looked up from his computer, startled by my sudden intrusion. "Kiara, I told you on the phone I cannot bypass a court-ordered freeze." He started holding his hands up defensively. I did not say a word. I simply walked up to his mahogany desk and dropped the heavy leather ledger right in front of him. I flipped it open to the page bearing his name and pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the detailed notes regarding his near indictment 10 years ago. Mr. Henderson's face drained of all color. He stared at the page, his eyes widening in absolute horror as he recognized Mama Vivian's handwriting and the highly confidential details of his darkest professional secret. "Where did you get this?" he whispered, his voice trembling violently. "Mama Vivian left it to me," I replied smoothly, leaning over his desk so we were face to face. "She left me everything, Ronald. The properties, the ledgers, the secrets, all of it. Now my husband and his spoiled sister think they can use your bank to play games with my livelihood because they are too stupid to realize their mother moved her own money into a blind trust before she died. I did not steal a single dime, and you are going to help me prove it." "What do you want me to do?" he stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "It is a legal court order, Kiara. If I violate it, I will lose my job." "You will lose a lot more than your job if I hand this ledger over to the Federal Banking Commission," I countered, tapping the open book. "I know exactly how these emergency freezes work. They only apply to the specific accounts listed in the subpoena. The subpoena listed my corporate LLC accounts. It did not list my private personal accounts, which I also hold at this bank." I pulled a blank check from my purse and slammed it on the desk next to the ledger. "You are going to immediately authorize a temporary unsecured business line of credit under my personal name for the exact amount that is currently frozen in my business accounts. You have the executive authority to approve personal lines of credit up to $250,000 without board approval. Do it now. I will transfer the funds to my vendors myself, bypassing the frozen LLC accounts entirely. When the judge inevitably throws out this ridiculous lawsuit next week and unfreezes my business assets, I will pay back the personal line of credit in full. No harm, no foul." Mr. Henderson stared at me, his breathing shallow. He looked at the ledger, then at my blank check, then back at the ledger. He knew he was trapped. He knew Mama Vivian had owned him, and now by extension I owned him too. Without another word, he frantically typed on his keyboard, pulling up the executive override screens. Within 10 minutes, he handed me a confirmation receipt. A massive personal line of credit had been instantly approved and deposited into my private checking account. I had full access to my operating capital. The mayor's gala was completely saved. I picked up the heavy ledger, tucked it safely under my arm, and offered him a polite, chilling smile. "Thank you for your exceptional customer service today, Mr. Henderson. I always knew I could count on this bank." I walked out of the pristine lobby feeling a surge of pure, unadulterated adrenaline. Darren had tried to suffocate my business, but he had only succeeded in proving exactly how untouchable I truly was. The next evening, the grand ballroom of the downtown convention center was completely transformed. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over 50 tables draped in heavy white linen. My catering staff moved flawlessly through the room, dressed in crisp black uniforms, serving the exquisite 5-course meal with military precision. The mayor was delighted. The wealthy donors were raving about the perfectly seared Wagyu beef. Soul and Spice was executing a masterclass in high-end catering. I stood near the kitchen entrance wearing a tailored black blazer over a silk camisole, holding a clipboard and observing my well-oiled machine. I was exhausted, but I was entirely victorious. Then the main ballroom doors swung open, and the energy in the room shifted. Tasha walked in. She was clinging to the arm of a wealthy local politician clearly attending the gala as his plus one. She was wearing a stunning floor-length emerald green gown that hugged her curves, but it was the jewelry that caught my eye. Resting heavily against her collarbone was a massive, blindingly bright diamond necklace. It looked identical to the $20,000 piece I had seen listed on the church credit card statements in Mama Vivian's ledger. Tasha scanned the room, a smug, expectant smile on her face. She was looking for a disaster. She was looking for cheap replacement food panicked staff or an empty buffet. She fully expected to see me crying in a corner ruined by the frozen bank accounts she had orchestrated. Instead, her eyes landed on me. I was standing tall, radiant, and completely in control of the most successful gala of the season. I caught her eye across the crowded ballroom. I did not glare. I did not frown. I simply raised my clipboard, offered her a slow, knowing smile, and gave a tiny, mocking wave. Tasha's smug expression instantly shattered, replaced by a look of sheer panicked confusion. The trap she set had failed spectacularly, and she had absolutely no idea how I had escaped. I watched her perfectly painted lips part in shock as she took in the lavish spread, the bustling waitstaff, and the overwhelmingly positive energy of the room. She had come expecting to see a ruined woman begging for scraps. Instead, she was standing in the middle of my triumph. But Tasha was not the type of woman to gracefully accept defeat gracefully. She was a cornered animal, and cornered animals always lash out when their territory is threatened. I handed my heavy metal clipboard to my sous chef and smoothed down the front of my tailored black blazer. I knew exactly what she was going to do before she even took her first step in her expensive heels. Tasha locked eyes with me, her confusion quickly morphing into a bitter, venomous glare. She adjusted the heavy diamond necklace resting against her chest, pasted a fake, overly bright smile onto her face, and began marching directly toward the center of the grand ballroom. She was heading straight for table number 1, the mayor's table. The mayor was a highly respected figure in Atlanta, surrounded tonight by the city's most affluent Black socialites, powerful corporate business owners, and influential church leaders. This was the exact demographic DeAndre relied on for his expanding youth ministry, and the exact demographic Darren actively courted for his high-level financial investments. It was a table of extreme power and immense wealth. Tasha reached the table just as the mayor was taking a bite of the imported Wagyu beef. "Excuse me, Mayor," Tasha announced, her voice pitched unnaturally loud to ensure the surrounding VIP tables could hear her clearly over the soft jazz music. "I am so sorry to interrupt your meal tonight, but I feel an absolute moral obligation to warn you and your guests." The mayor paused, his silver fork hovering in midair. The wealthy donors sitting around him stopped talking, turning their attention to the frantic woman in the emerald green gown. Tasha sighed dramatically, placing a manicured hand over her heart in a practiced gesture of deep concern. "I know the caterer personally." Tasha continued, shaking her head sadly as if the burden of truth was breaking her heart. "She is my sister-in-law, and I just cannot in good conscience let you or your esteemed guests consume this food. Kiara has been under immense financial strain lately. Her business accounts were recently frozen by a judge due to some very serious legal troubles regarding missing family funds from my recently deceased mother. I am terrified she cut corners on the ingredients tonight to save money. This meat tastes completely wrong, and the seafood smells highly suspect. I would hate for the entire city council to get severe food poisoning just because Soul and Spice is secretly bankrupt and cutting corners." A collective murmur of shock rippled through the immediate vicinity. Several guests at adjacent tables actually put their forks down, eyeing their plates with sudden suspicion. The mayor looked down at his meal, then up at Tasha, a deep frown forming on his face. Tasha smirked, casting a sideways victorious glance in my direction. She was trying to publicly assassinate my professional character, using her proximity to my family as false proof of my incompetence. I did not rush over in a panic. I walked toward the mayor's table with slow, deliberate, and measured steps. I carried myself with the absolute confidence of a woman who knew the exact origin of every single ingredient in her kitchen, and more importantly, the exact financial origin of the jewelry resting around her accuser's neck. "Good evening, Mayor," I said warmly, coming to a stop right next to Tasha. "I hope you are enjoying the imported Japanese wagyu. I personally selected the cuts this morning from our exclusive distributor and oversaw the searing process myself." The mayor looked incredibly relieved to see me step in. "Kiara, the food is spectacular as always," he said, though his tone was slightly hesitant. "But Mrs. Thompson here is raising some rather alarming concerns about your sourcing and your current business operations." I turned to face Tasha. Up close, I could see the slight nervous tremor in her hands. She was terrified, but she was too deeply committed to her lie to back down now. I smiled sweetly at her, channeling every ounce of Mama Vivian's icy composure. "Tasha, it is so wonderful to see you here tonight," I said, my voice carrying clearly and crisply across the suddenly silent tables. "Especially considering the deep mourning period our family is currently in after burying your mother just 2 weeks ago. But I suppose a high society party was just too tempting to resist. As for the food, I can assure everyone at this table that Soul and Spice operates with impeccable financial health. In fact, all vendor invoices for tonight were paid in full in cash directly from my personal accounts. There were absolutely no corners cut." Tasha scoffed loudly, crossing her arms defensively. "Oh, please. We all know you are completely broke, Kiara. You are just trying to save face in front of these important people so you do not lose your only source of income." I let out a soft, elegant laugh that made her flinch. "Broke is a highly relative term, Tasha. For instance, some people might consider a church youth ministry to be broke when its expansion fund suddenly runs a massive unexplained deficit right before the annual audit." The color instantly drained from Tasha's perfectly contoured face. The smugness vanished entirely, replaced by a look of absolute terror. Several prominent church elders from her exact denomination were sitting just 2 tables away, and I saw their heads snap up instantly at the direct mention of the youth fund. I took a step closer to her, lowering my voice just a fraction, but keeping it sharp and loud enough for the elite socialites to catch every single syllable. "That is a truly breathtaking necklace you are wearing tonight, Tasha. The way those heavy diamonds catch the chandelier light is just magnificent. Is that the Cartier Essential line?" Tasha swallowed hard, her hand flying up to cover the diamonds instinctively as if my gaze was physically burning them. "Yes, it is," she stammered, stepping back and bumping into an empty chair. "It is gorgeous." I continued, my tone deceptively cheerful. "And it takes a very special kind of devotion to secure a $20,000 piece of jewelry on a youth pastor's salary. Tell me, Tasha, did DeAndre put that on his personal credit card, or did he swipe the church charity credit card again? Because I saw a Cartier charge for that exact amount listed right next to a private charter flight to Miami on the 5th of last month. It is truly amazing how much the Lord provides when you have unrestricted access to the congregation's donation plate." The grand ballroom went dead silent. It was the heavy, suffocating kind of silence that precedes a massive explosion. The mayor's eyes widened in sheer disbelief. The prominent church elders nearby actually gasped out loud, their faces turning red with immediate fury. Whispers instantly erupted among the elite black socialites, spreading like wildfire from table to table. Embezzling church funds was the ultimate cardinal sin in this specific community. It was absolute social and professional suicide. Tasha's mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating on dry land. She looked frantically around the room, seeing the harsh expressions of disgust and judgment forming on the faces of the most powerful people in Atlanta. She had tried to humiliate me over a plate of seasoned beef, and in return, I had just incinerated her entire social standing in less than 60 seconds. "You are lying," Tasha hissed, tears of hot panic welling in her eyes. "You are a bitter, jealous liar making up stories." "Am I?" I asked calmly, holding my ground. "I am sure the upcoming emergency audit of DeAndre's pastoral accounts will clear everything right up. Until then, please enjoy the wagyu. It is fully paid for. Unlike that necklace." Tasha let out a choked, humiliated sob. She turned around and practically sprinted toward the ballroom exit, her emerald gown swishing frantically around her ankles. The wealthy local politician, who had brought her as his guest, did not follow her out. He immediately began making frantic apologies to the mayor, actively distancing himself from the toxic fallout of her presence. I turned back to the mayor with a gracious smile, apologizing for the brief, unfortunate interruption, and signaled my waitstaff to seamlessly continue the dessert service. I had just successfully defended my empire on my own turf, and the adrenaline coursing through my veins was incredibly intoxicating. I walked back toward the kitchen corridor to check on the final plating of the chocolate lava cakes, but before I could push my way through the heavy swinging doors, a large hand grabbed my upper arm, yanking me roughly into a secluded, dimly lit alcove near the service elevators. I stumbled forward, my heels scraping sharply against the polished floor. I looked up and saw Darren. His expensive corporate suit was deeply wrinkled, his silk tie was loosened, and his face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He was breathing heavily, having clearly bypassed the front security desk to hunt me down in the venue. "What the hell are you doing, Kiara?" Darren snarled, his grip on my arm tightening painfully as he pinned me slightly against the wall. I yanked my arm out of his grasp with intense force, stepping back and glaring right back at him. "I am running a highly successful event for the mayor of this city, Darren. Something you and your sister completely failed to sabotage today. How did you even get in here without an invitation?" Darren ignored my question entirely, stepping aggressively into my personal space. His eyes were bloodshot and wild. "Tasha just called me crying hysterically from her car. She said you are spreading vicious, insane rumors about DeAndre and the church board in front of the entire city council. The senior pastor just called DeAndre at home and demanded an emergency financial meeting tomorrow morning at dawn. Do you have any idea what you have done? You are going to completely ruin his career." I crossed my arms, completely unmoved by his frantic panic. "I did not do anything to DeAndre. DeAndre ruined his own career the second he decided to steal from his trusting congregation to buy his wife diamonds and fund your little suburban love nest for Chloe. I just shined a very bright spotlight on his hypocrisy." Darren flinched violently as I explicitly mentioned Chloe's house. He realized in that exact moment that I knew significantly more about his secret life than he ever thought possible. He ran a shaking hand over his face, desperately trying to regain his dominant, condescending corporate composure. He reached into his suit jacket pocket and pulled out a thick, legally folded document. He shoved it forcefully toward my chest. "I am not here to play games about DeAndre and his church money," Darren hissed, his voice trembling with barely contained fury. "I am here to fix the massive mess you are trying to make of my inheritance. Tasha told me the bank somehow bypassed the emergency freeze on your accounts today. I do not know who you slept with or who you blackmailed to get that done, but your lucky streak ends right now." I looked down at the document pressed against my blazer. It was a quitclaim deed. Darren pointed a rigid, angry finger at the paper. "My lawyers did a deep, extensive dive on Mama Vivian's estate this afternoon. We found out she owns several highly valuable commercial properties downtown that were not listed in the standard family trust documents, because we are still legally married on paper. The state might try to claim you have a marital right to a percentage of those commercial assets during the divorce. I am not giving you a single penny of my family's legacy to fund your catering business. You are going to sign this quitclaim deed right now, permanently waiving all rights to any commercial properties ever owned by Vivian Thompson." I stared at him, marveling at his absolute, staggering ignorance. He thought Mama Vivian just owned a few spare buildings on the edge of town. He had no idea she owned half the commercial real estate in the city, and he certainly had no idea she had already transferred every single one of them into a blind trust, with my name explicitly listed as the sole beneficiary. He thought forcing me to sign this paper would protect his wealth. In reality, it was a completely useless piece of trash. "Sign it." "Kiara," Darren threatened, his voice dropping to a menacing, guttural growl, "if you do not sign this right now, I will personally make sure the health department shuts down your commercial kitchen tomorrow morning. I will sue you for everything you have ever earned. I will destroy your life until you are begging me for spare change on the street. Sign the damn paper right now." I looked at his desperate, angry face. I felt the comforting memory of the heavy, rusted metal lockbox sitting securely in the trunk of my car, waiting patiently to unleash complete financial devastation. I did not need to physically fight him in this dark hallway. I did not need to scream or defend myself against his empty, pathetic threats. The trap was fully set. and he was begging me to spring it himself. I reached out and gently pushed the legal document back against his chest, refusing to take it. I looked him dead in the eye and offered him the brightest, most terrifyingly serene smile I had ever mustered. "You want me to sign away my rights, Darren?" I asked, my voice soft, sweet, and perfectly calm. "Yes," he demanded, his jaw clenched tight. "Okay," I replied cheerfully. "I will sign absolutely whatever you want. I will sign the quitclaim deed. I will sign the divorce papers. I will sign away everything you put in front of me. But I am not doing it in a dark hallway like a criminal. Bring all your paperwork to the official will reading at your lawyer's office on Friday morning. I will sign everything in front of your family and the notary public. Until then, get out of my venue before I have the mayor's security detail physically throw you out onto the pavement." Darren stared at me, his jaw working furiously as he processed the absolute finality in my tone. He wanted to scream to assert his dominance, but we were standing mere feet away from the service elevators where the mayor's private security detail was stationed. He recognized that he had absolutely no leverage in this building. Without uttering another word, he turned on his heel and stormed down the service corridor, his heavy footsteps echoing against the polished concrete floor. I watched him leave, took a deep and steadying breath, and walked back into the kitchen to finish my spectacular night. By Wednesday morning, the adrenaline of the gala success was still humming in my veins. My catering company was on the front page of every local society blog, but I did not have time to celebrate. Friday was approaching fast. The official will reading was the final battleground, and before I walked into that law office, I needed to completely isolate Darren and Tasha from their support system. I needed to cut off the head of their moral high ground. I needed to break Pastor DeAndre. I sent him a brief text message requesting a private meeting at an upscale, highly discreet coffee shop in the Buckhead district, far away from his megachurch and his congregation. I told him I had information regarding the anonymous text message he received at the repast, and if he did not meet me, my next message would go directly to the local news stations. He arrived exactly on time. I was already seated at a small corner table sipping a black coffee. DeAndre walked in wearing a perfectly pressed charcoal gray suit, carrying his leather-bound Bible under one arm. He was desperately trying to project an aura of unbothered divine authority, but I could see the dark circles under his eyes. He had not slept. The panic was slowly eating him alive. He sat down across from me, placing his hands neatly on the table. "Kiara, I am only here because I believe in the power of grace and forgiveness." DeAndre began, his voice dropping into that familiar, soothing pastoral cadence. "You caused quite a disgraceful scene at the mayor's gala last night. Tasha was completely heartbroken by your vicious accusations. I understand you are in a season of deep turmoil and bitterness over the divorce, but lashing out at my wife with fabricated lies about our church finances is a sin I cannot allow you to continue." I let him finish his prepared sermon. I did not blink. I did not argue. I simply reached into my oversized leather tote bag and pulled out a thick manila folder. I had spent the early hours of the morning at a secure printing shop copying the most damning pages of Mama Vivian's ledger and printing out high-resolution screenshots from the burner phone. I opened the folder and slid the first document across the table. It was a printed photograph of Tasha wearing the Cartier diamond necklace, placed right next to a highlighted bank statement from the church's Youth Ministry Expansion Fund. "You can drop the holy act, DeAndre," I said, keeping my voice incredibly low and perfectly flat. "I know exactly what is missing from your accounts. And frankly, a $20,000 diamond necklace is the absolute least of your problems." DeAndre glanced at the paper, a nervous bead of sweat forming on his temple. He quickly looked around the coffee shop to make sure no one was listening. "Kiara, these documents prove nothing. I am the chief financial officer of that ministry. I oversee every dime. My wife does not even have direct access to the routing numbers." "Oh, DeAndre," I sighed, shaking my head with genuine pity. "You are so busy preaching on the stage that you have absolutely no idea what is happening in your own home. Look at the next page." I slid a second stack of papers toward him. These were the screenshots from the burner phone. Specifically, the text message thread between Tasha and Darren from exactly 4 months ago. Read it out loud, I commanded. DeAndre swallowed hard. He picked up the printed screenshot. His eyes scanned the text message Tasha had sent to Darren. As he read the words, the color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a sick, terrified ghost. His hands began to shake so violently that the paper rattled against the wooden table. I will read it for you since you seem to have lost your voice, I offered coldly. Tasha wrote, Hey Darren, I just wired the $80,000 for Chloe's townhouse down payment. I routed it from the youth building fund through that dummy LLC we set up last year. DeAndre never checks the secondary escrow accounts anyway. The man is clueless when it comes to the real estate side of the church. Just make sure you get Mama to sign the historic house over to both of us before she passes. DeAndre dropped the paper as if it were entirely engulfed in flames. He slumped back in his chair, the pastoral facade completely and permanently shattered. He was no longer a powerful, arrogant community leader. He was a broken, humiliated man who had just realized his own wife viewed him as an incompetent fool. She stole $80,000, DeAndre whispered, his voice cracking with raw, unmasked devastation. She used the church's money to buy a house for Darren's pregnant mistress. Yes, I replied, leaning forward and resting my arms on the table. She committed massive, highly documented federal wire fraud. She dragged your church, your reputation, and your freedom into a felony conspiracy just to secure her spot as Darren's favorite sibling. Tasha wanted half of Mama Vivian's estate, and she was willing to gamble your entire life away to get it. DeAndre closed his eyes, pressing the heels of his hands against his forehead. The breathing exercises he was trying to do were completely failing. If the board sees this, I am ruined, he muttered frantically. The IRS will audit the entire church. They will strip my pastoral credentials. I could go to federal prison for financial negligence. Kiara, you have to tell me where you got this. Who else has these files? I am the only one who has them, I stated firmly. Mama Vivian gave them to me. She knew everything Tasha was doing behind your back, DeAndre. Mama Vivian was quietly using her own private money to float your church accounts and hide the deficit so you would not get audited. But she is gone now. The protection is gone. And Darren is trying to steal the only business I have left to my name. DeAndre looked at me, his eyes wide with a desperate, pleading terror. What do you want, Kiara? Name your price. I will take out a second mortgage on my house. I will pay back the youth fund myself. Just please, I am begging you, do not send this to the senior board or the police. I leaned back in my chair, taking a slow sip of my black coffee. I felt the immense, intoxicating rush of total control. I did not want his money. I wanted his absolute compliance. I do not want your money, DeAndre. I want your silence. This Friday morning, we are all attending the official will reading at the family law office. Darren and Tasha think they are about to inherit the world, and they think they are going to force me to walk away with nothing. What is your demand? He asked, his voice completely defeated. When the lawyer starts reading the documents, you are going to sit there and keep your mouth completely shut, I instructed clearly. When everything falls apart for them, and trust me, it will fall apart in spectacular fashion, you will not intervene. You will not offer them pastoral comfort. You will not offer them financial help. You will abandon Tasha exactly the way she was willing to abandon you to federal prison. If you try to warn her, or if you try to step in and defend Darren, I will email this entire folder directly to the IRS and the local news syndicates before the meeting even adjourns. Do we have a deal? DeAndre stared at the printed text messages on the table. He looked at the words his wife had typed, calling him clueless casually, throwing his life's work into jeopardy to fund her brother's adultery. The betrayal in his eyes hardened into something incredibly cold and unforgiving. We have a deal, DeAndre said, his voice stripped of all emotion. I will not say a single word to save her. Not say a s. She dug this grave herself. I smiled, a tight, satisfied expression. I reached across the table, gathered the printed documents, and slid them back into my manila folder. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my skirt. I always knew you were a smart man when it came to self-preservation, Pastor DeAndre. I will see you on Friday. Be sure to wear a nice suit. It is going to be a very memorable morning. I walked out of the coffee shop into the bright Atlanta sunlight. The air felt incredibly crisp and clean. I had just successfully neutralized the biggest threat to my endgame. Without DeAndre's money and church influence to fall back on, Tasha would be completely defenseless when the true will was read. Darren would have absolutely no one to bail him out. The board was perfectly set. I pulled my car keys out of my purse, walking toward the parking lot with a light, energetic step. I was already mentally reviewing the catering schedule for the rest of the week. My phone buzzed aggressively in the palm of my hand. I glanced down at the screen. It was a text message from Darren. My stomach gave a tiny involuntary lurch. I unlocked the screen. There was no text, only a single, high-resolution photograph attached. I tapped the image to enlarge it, and my blood ran completely cold. It was a picture of the alleyway behind my rented commercial kitchen. Both of my heavy-duty custom-wrapped Soul and Spice catering vans were elevated in the air, securely hooked to the back of two massive industrial tow trucks. The drivers were securing the heavy metal chains around the axles. Beneath the picture, a new message from Darren popped up on the screen. "You wanted to play games with my inheritance at the gala? Let us see how you managed to cater your corporate events this weekend with absolutely no transport vehicles. My lawyers just secured a secondary lien against your business assets based on the missing estate funds. The trucks are legally impounded until the investigation is complete. See you on Friday, Kiara." Try not to walk to the law office. I stared at the photo of my custom-wrapped catering vans, suspended in the air. A normal business owner would have collapsed into a full-blown panic attack right there in the coffee shop parking lot. My entire weekend corporate catering schedule relied on those two heavy-duty refrigerated trucks. Without them, the food would spoil, the contracts would be breached, and Soul and Spice would face catastrophic financial penalties. Darren knew exactly what he was doing. He was trying to sever my operational arteries. But as I looked closer at the high-resolution photograph he had so arrogantly sent me, my initial spike of anxiety quickly morphed into a cold, highly analytical focus. I zoomed in on the side of the heavy industrial tow truck lifting my van. Printed on the yellow metal door in bold black lettering was the company name, Apex Towing and Recovery. Darren claimed his lawyers had secured a secondary lien against my business assets. That was a blatant, laughable lie. I had just bypassed the bank freeze yesterday, and the civil court system in Atlanta did not move fast enough to authorize physical asset seizures within 24 hours without a massive federal indictment. Darren had not used the legal system. He had used his wallet. He had simply found a predatory, morally flexible towing company, handed the driver a thick stack of cash, and ordered an illegal private impound to break my spirit before the official will reading. I did not text Darren back. I did not give him the satisfaction of a desperate phone call. Instead, I walked straight to my car, unlocked the doors, and retrieved Mama Vivian's heavy leather ledger from the trunk. I slid into the driver's seat, turned on the air conditioning, and began flipping through the meticulously organized pages. Mama Vivian had an entire section of her ledger dedicated to the industrial zones on the south side of the city. These were the gritty, overlooked commercial lots that housed auto repair shops, salvage yards, and impound lots. I ran my finger down the alphabetical list of commercial tenants who leased land from her various shell corporations. I stopped at the letter A, Apex Towing and Recovery. Owner and operator Dexter Hayes. I traced the line across the page to read Mama Vivian's flawless cursive notes. Dexter Hayes leased a massive 2-acre gravel lot from a corporate entity named Iron Magnolia Holdings. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out the sealed legal envelope I had opened the night before. I scanned the thick stack of trust documents. Iron Magnolia Holdings was one of the primary limited liability companies officially transferred into my blind trust. I was not just reading a ledger anymore. I was reading my own property portfolio. According to Mama Vivian's strict accounting, Dexter Hayes was currently 7 months behind on his commercial lease payments. He owed Iron Magnolia Holdings over $40,000 in back rent. Mama Vivian had noted that she was preparing to serve him with an immediate eviction notice right before her health rapidly declined. Dexter was operating a shady towing business on borrowed time, on land that I now legally owned. Darren thought he had paid a wolf to attack me. He had no idea he had just handed my property over to my own guard dog. I started my car engine and merged onto the highway, heading straight for the South Side Industrial District. The glamorous skyscrapers of Buckhead quickly gave way to chain-link fences, cracked concrete, and massive warehouses. I pulled up to the heavily fortified gates of Apex Towing and Recovery. The yard was packed with repossessed cars and wrecked vehicles, sitting right in the front row. Completely untouched were my two pristine catering vans. I parked my car right in front of the main gate, blocking the entrance entirely, and walked into the small, dingy portable office trailer. The air inside smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap air freshener. A heavy-set man with a thick beard and grease-stained coveralls was sitting behind a cluttered metal desk, aggressively chewing a piece of gum. He looked up at my tailored skirt and designer silk blouse with obvious disdain. "Lot is closed to the public for the next hour, lady," he grunted, not even bothering to sit up straight. "If your car got dragged in here, you need to come back at 3 o'clock with cash and a valid registration." "You must be Dexter," I said smoothly, walking right up to his desk and completely ignoring his dismissal. "I am not here to pay an impound fee. I am here to collect my two commercial catering vans. The ones you illegally towed from my private kitchen alleyway about an hour ago." Dexter scoffed, crossing his thick arms over his chest. "Lady, I do not illegally tow anything. A wealthy guy named Darren Thompson authorized the seizure based on a legal financial dispute. He paid the premium VIP transport fee. Those vans stay locked up until he personally calls me and gives the green light. Now get out of my office before I charge you a trespassing fee." I did not move an inch. I reached into my designer bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a formal, heavily stamped copy of the property deed for the exact lot we were standing on, alongside a printed statement of the $40,000 in unpaid back rent. I placed the paper face up on his desk, right over his messy pile of dispatch receipts. "You should really read the fine print on your commercial lease agreements, Dexter," I advised, keeping my tone delightfully pleasant. "Your landlord is Iron Magnolia Holdings. That company is now managed entirely by me. My name is Kiara Thompson, and as of this morning, I am the sole executive director of the trust that owns the very dirt under your boots." Dexter stopped chewing his gum. His eyes darted down to the legal document. He saw the official state seals, the Iron Magnolia logo, and my name boldly printed at the bottom. The color rapidly drained from his flushed face. "You are currently 7 months delinquent on your lease," I continued, leaning over his desk to ensure he felt the full weight of my presence. "That is $40,000 in arrears. According to the state commercial property laws, I have the absolute legal right to lock the gates to this entire facility, right now seize every single vehicle on this lot as collateral, and shut your entire shady operation down permanently. Or you can hand me the keys to my catering vans within the next 60 seconds and we can pretend this little misunderstanding never happened." Dexter swallowed hard, a thick bead of sweat rolling down the side of his face. He was a bully, but he was a bully who only picked fights with people he thought were powerless. Faced with total financial ruin, his tough guy persona instantly evaporated. "Look, Ms. Thompson, I had no idea who you were," he stammered, frantically opening his top desk drawer. "The guy Darren, he just threw $5,000 cash at me and said his ex-wife was trying to steal his business assets. I was just doing a job. I swear I did not know you owned the property." I held out my hand, palm up. Dexter practically tripped over his own chair as he lunged forward, dropping the keyrings to both of my catering vans right into my hand. "I appreciate your quick cooperation, Dexter." I smiled, my fingers curling tightly around the metal keys. "But simply returning my stolen property does not quite cover the extreme inconvenience you caused my business today. If you want me to forgive that $40,000 debt and let you keep your business, I need a very specific favor." Dexter nodded eagerly, terrified of losing his livelihood. "Anything you need, Miss Thompson, you name it." I pulled out my phone and pulled up a photograph of Darren's vehicle. It was a brand new custom black Range Rover autobiography. I read the license plate number out loud, ensuring Dexter wrote it down on his notepad. "Darren is currently in the upscale Phipps Plaza shopping district," I instructed clearly. "I know this because his pregnant mistress Chloe just checked into an expensive baby boutique on her social media account 10 minutes ago. They parked his Range Rover in the VIP valet zone. I want you to send your best driver over there right now. You are going to tow that vehicle and bring it directly back to this dusty yard." Dexter looked nervous. He paid for VIP valet parking. "The valet attendants will fight my driver. That is a highly secure area." I leaned closer, my eyes locking onto his. "You will tell the valet attendants that there is a severe safety recall on the brakes and the dealership ordered an immediate mandatory impound. You will slide the valet a $100 bill and they will look the other way. You tow that arrogant man's car, you bring it here. And you do not answer a single phone call from him for the next 48 hours. Do we have a deal, Dexter?" "Yes, ma'am," Dexter agreed instantly, grabbing his two-way radio to bark orders at his drivers. I walked out of the dingy trailer, the heavy keys to my vans jingling loudly in my hand. I unlocked my vehicles, signaled my sous chef to send 2 drivers to come collect them, and drove myself back to my pristine commercial kitchen. The crisis was completely averted, and I had not even broken a sweat. Across town in the heart of the luxury shopping district, Darren was feeling entirely invincible. He was walking out of a high-end nursery boutique, carrying several expensive shopping bags filled with imported cashmere baby blankets and designer newborn clothes. Chloe was clinging tightly to his arm, sipping a specialized iced tea and laughing at a joke he had just made. They were celebrating my supposed downfall. Darren was fully convinced he had successfully ruined my weekend catering contracts, broken my spirit, and secured his inheritance. They strolled confidently up to the VIP valet stand, expecting the attendants to immediately pull the gleaming black Range Rover around to the front curb. Darren handed the valet his ticket with a smug, arrogant flick of his wrist. The valet attendant looked at the ticket, then looked up at Darren with a deeply uncomfortable expression. "Sir, I am so sorry," the young man stammered. "The young man. A commercial tow truck came and collected your vehicle about 20 minutes ago." Darren froze, his smug smile dropping instantly. "What the hell are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice echoing loudly across the upscale plaza. "I paid for premium parking. You let someone steal my car." "The driver had official dealership paperwork, sir," the valet explained quickly, taking a step back from Darren's rising anger. "He said there was a critical, mandatory safety recall and the vehicle was illegally operating on the road. We had no choice but to release it." Chloe let out a loud, dramatic gasp, dropping her iced tea onto the immaculate pavement. "Darren, what is going on?" "My feet are swelling. I cannot stand out here in the heat. Call them right now and get the car back." Darren frantically pulled his phone out of his pocket, his fingers shaking with rage as he dialed the dealership. Before the call could even connect, his screen vibrated. A new text message had just arrived. He opened the message. It was from me. There was no text, just a single high-resolution photograph. It was a picture of his pristine custom black Range Rover, securely hooked to the back of a rusted Apex towing truck, sitting right in the middle of a dusty, heavily fenced impound lot on the south side of town. Darren stared at the screen, the color draining entirely from his face. He looked at the screaming, demanding pregnant woman clinging to his arm, and then he looked out at the busy, unforgiving city traffic. He was completely stranded on the side of the road with his expensive baby clothes. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the chest. He was not fighting a desperate, grieving caterer anymore. He was fighting an opponent who was dismantling his life with invisible, terrifying resources, and he had absolutely no idea where the next strike was going to come from. Friday morning arrived with the crisp, undeniable promise of absolute destruction. I did not wake up at dawn to tie on my catering apron. I did not check on my commercial ovens or review my weekend vendor contracts. Instead, I drove straight to the most exclusive Black-owned beauty salon in Buckhead. I sat in a plush leather chair while my stylist carefully washed, conditioned, and flat-ironed my hair into a flawless bone-straight silk press that cascaded down my back like a dark waterfall. Next came the makeup artist who contoured my cheekbones with razor-sharp precision. She applied a bold, matte red lipstick that screamed pure, unadulterated authority. I stood up from the salon chair and slipped into a custom-tailored jet black designer suit. The fabric hugged my curves, perfectly armored by sharp shoulders and a plunging neckline. I stepped into a pair of 5-inch black stiletto heels. I looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror. The exhausted, tear-stained caregiver who had hauled bedpans, monitored chemotherapy schedules, and tolerated blatant disrespect was completely gone. In her place stood a woman who secretly owned half the city. I was dressing for a funeral today, but this time nobody was actually dead. I was attending the funeral of my ex-husband's ego. The offices of Higgins and Associates were located on the top floor of a sleek modern glass high-rise in downtown Atlanta. Mr. Higgins had been Mama Vivian's estate attorney for over 30 years. He was an old-fashioned man who handled the family's basic paperwork, entirely oblivious to the massive hidden financial empire Mama Vivian had constructed right under his nose. I rode the private elevator up to the penthouse level, my stilettos clicking sharply against the polished marble floor of the lobby. When I pushed open the heavy glass doors to the waiting room, the entire cast of characters was already assembled. The tension in the air was so thick, it was practically suffocating. I took a seat in a high-backed leather chair directly across from them, crossing my legs and resting my designer handbag gracefully on my lap. Darren looked absolutely terrible. His expensive corporate suit was visibly wrinkled, and the dark, heavy bags under his eyes told me he had spent the entire night fighting with the predatory impound lot, trying to locate his missing luxury vehicle. He shot me a glare filled with pure venom, but he kept his mouth shut. Chloe was sitting right next to him, aggressively rubbing her massive pregnant belly. Her face was twisted into a permanent, highly irritable scowl. On the opposite side of the room sat Tasha and DeAndre. Tasha was wearing another flashy, highly inappropriate designer outfit dripping in heavy gold jewelry she had undoubtedly purchased with stolen church funds. But DeAndre was the most fascinating sight of all. The powerful, booming youth pastor was completely silent. He sat rigidly on the absolute edge of the leather sofa, his hands clasped tightly together, staring directly at the floor. He refused to look at me. He refused to look at his arrogant wife. He looked exactly like a man waiting for his execution. Tasha, entirely oblivious to her husband's internal panic, decided to break the suffocating silence. She flipped her expensive hair extensions over her shoulder and began speaking loudly, deliberately, making sure her voice carried directly to my side of the room. "I already have the primary contractors lined up," Tasha announced proudly to Darren, waving her manicured hand in the air. "We are gutting Mama's entire kitchen by Monday morning. That old aesthetic is so depressingly outdated, and it reeks of cheap cooking oil. I am knocking down the wall between the formal dining room and the living area to create an open-concept luxury space. I ran the market numbers yesterday, and if we list the historic house as a premium Airbnb for out-of-town executives, it will pull in at least $3,000 a weekend. It is a brilliant stream of passive income." Chloe abruptly stopped rubbing her belly and turned to snap at Tasha with pure hostility. "I am absolutely not sharing my new home with a bunch of random strangers every weekend, Tasha. Darren already promised me that we are moving into the master suite permanently today. The custom nursery furniture is being delivered on Tuesday afternoon. You can find another property to play real estate agent with." Tasha rolled her eyes condescendingly, crossing her arms. "Chloe, try to understand basic financial investments. You and Darren can live in the small guest house out back. The main property needs to generate massive income for the family legacy. Besides, half of that historic house legally belongs to me according to the will. I am not letting $1 million asset sit there just so you can play house and decorate a nursery." Chloe's face flushed with explosive anger. She aggressively slapped Darren's arm. "Darren, tell your greedy sister she is completely out of her mind. And you need to make sure Mr. Higgins puts my name firmly on the property deed today. After that complete nightmare with the dealership towing your car yesterday and leaving us stranded on the sidewalk like peasants, I demand actual financial security for our son. I am not playing secondary games with your family anymore. You owe me that security." Darren gritted his teeth, his jaw muscles clenching so tight they looked ready to snap. "Keep your voices down, both of you," he hissed through his teeth, looking frantically around the upscale waiting room. "We are in a professional environment. The house is big enough to figure out a fair compromise later. Just let me handle the lawyers first." I let out a soft, melodic laugh. It echoed clearly and sharply in the quiet waiting room. 4 heads instantly snapped in my direction. Tasha glared at me, her acrylic nails digging violently into her expensive leather purse. What exactly is so funny? Kiara Tasha demanded fiercely. Are you enjoying your last few minutes of pretending you actually belong here? Because once Mr. Higgins reads that, well, you are officially homeless and completely broke. I smiled warmly at her, adjusting my posture in the leather chair. I just think it is incredibly fascinating listening to you two fight so passionately over the wallpaper in a house that currently has 3 active reverse mortgages attached to it. It is exactly like watching two arrogant people argue over who gets to steer the Titanic after it already hit the iceberg. Darren stood up, his face turning a dangerous, angry shade of purple. Shut your mouth, Kiara. You know absolutely nothing about my mother's estate or her finances. You are just the hired help who vastly overstayed her welcome. My lawyers have already secured the secondary liens against your business assets. Once I get the official inheritance documents legally signed today, I am coming after your catering company. I am going to take every single dime you have managed to scrape together, and I will force you to close those doors permanently. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I slowly turned my calm, calculated gaze from Darren's red face to DeAndre, who was actively sweating onto the stiff white collar of his dress shirt. DeAndre, I called out softly. Your wife seems very confident about her financial future today. Are you confident, Pastor? Are you feeling blessed and highly favored this morning? DeAndre swallowed audibly. He slowly lifted his heavy head, his eyes filled with a desperate, pathetic pleading. He opened his mouth to speak, but his throat was so dry that absolutely no words came out. He just stared at me silently, begging me to maintain the brutal deal we struck in the coffee shop. Tasha looked at her husband, thoroughly confused and highly annoyed by his weak silence. DeAndre, tell her to shut up. Tell her the church legal team will back us up if she tries anything stupid with her catering lawyers. Put her in her place. DeAndre closed his eyes tight and shook his head, his voice cracking into a broken whisper. Leave her alone, Tasha. Just leave her alone today. Tasha gasped in genuine shock, deeply offended by his sudden lack of support. Excuse me, what is wrong with you? You have been acting like a complete coward since yesterday afternoon. You are supposed to be the spiritual head of this household. Before Tasha could escalate her temper tantrum into a full screaming match, the heavy oak door leading to the inner law offices clicked open. Mr. Higgins stepped cautiously into the waiting room. He was a frail man in his late 60s, wearing a conservative tweed suit and adjusting a pair of thick reading glasses on his nose. He carried a massive, cream-colored folder heavily stamped with the Thompson family crest. Good morning, everyone, Mr. Higgins said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. Thank you all for coming. I know this is a difficult time of transition for the family. We are ready to proceed with the official reading of Vivian Thompson's last will and testament. Please follow me into the main conference room. Darren immediately puffed out his chest, restoring his unearned pride. He grabbed Chloe's hand, stepping forward aggressively to claim his position as the new patriarch of the family. Tasha jumped up right behind him, eager to secure her new Airbnb property and her massive influx of cash. I remained perfectly seated in my leather chair. I slowly uncrossed my ankles, smoothing a non-existent wrinkle from my tailored black skirt. Actually, Mr. Higgins, I announced, my voice cutting through the room with absolute unyielding authority. We are not quite ready to begin. We are waiting for one more person. Mr. Higgins stopped in his tracks, turning around with a deeply confused and slightly annoyed expression. I am sorry, Kiara, but this is a strictly closed family meeting. Vivian specifically outlined who was legally permitted to be in the room during the reading. I cannot allow any unauthorized guests to attend this confidential proceeding. I offered the old lawyer a polite but terrifyingly firm smile. My guest is highly authorized, Mr. Higgins. In fact, he will be the one running this meeting today. Darren barked out a harsh, mocking laugh that echoed off the glass walls. Are you completely delusional, Kiara? Mr. Higgins is the executor of this estate. You do not get to bring your cheap, strip mall divorce lawyer in here to try and negotiate a pathetic settlement. You are getting absolutely nothing. Right on cue, the heavy glass doors of the waiting room swung open with a commanding, violent swoosh. The air in the room instantly shifted, growing noticeably colder and infinitely more dangerous. A man walked in. He was not a cheap strip mall lawyer. He was Attorney Sterling, the most feared, high-powered corporate litigator in the entire state of Georgia. He wore a custom $5,000 navy blue suit that practically radiated intimidation and ruthless aggression. His shoes were polished to a perfect mirror shine, and he carried a sleek titanium locking briefcase. He walked with the heavy predatory stride of a man who routinely destroyed massive corporations and bankrupted billionaires before his morning coffee. Attorney Sterling bypassed Darren, entirely ignoring his presence, as if he were nothing more than a piece of uninteresting lobby furniture. He walked directly over to my chair, gave me a brief, highly respectful nod, and then turned his icy, calculating gaze onto the old family lawyer. Mr. Higgins, Attorney Sterling said, his voice deep and echoing with undeniable power. "My name is Attorney Sterling. I represent the primary executor and sole beneficiary of the Vivian Thompson Blind Trust. I suggest we move into the conference room immediately. We have a massive amount of asset transferring to discuss, and my client has a catering empire to run." The entire waiting room fell into a stunned, breathless silence as Attorney Sterling stood beside my chair. Mr. Higgins opened his mouth to object, his face turning a deep shade of crimson, but Sterling did not give him the opportunity to speak. Sterling simply gestured toward the heavy double doors of the main conference room with a sweeping, authoritative motion. Reluctantly, Mr. Higgins clutched his cream-colored folder against his chest and led the way. We filed into the massive glass-walled conference room. A long mahogany table dominated the space, surrounded by plush, high-backed leather executive chairs. The city of Atlanta sprawled out beneath us through the floor-to-ceiling windows, completely oblivious to the financial bloodbath that was about to take place on the penthouse level. I took a seat near the center of the table. Attorney Sterling sat directly to my right, placing his titanium briefcase on the polished wood with a heavy, intimidating thud. He did not open it yet. He simply folded his hands and waited. Darren quickly pulled out a chair for Chloe on the opposite side of the table, placing himself directly across from me. He wanted to look me in the eye when he won. Tasha sat next to Darren, practically bouncing in her seat with greedy anticipation. DeAndre took the chair at the very end of the table, as far away from his wife as physically possible. He kept his eyes glued to the mahogany grain, sweating profusely, looking absolutely sick to his stomach. A quiet woman in a gray suit sat quietly in the corner of the room. She was the firm's in-house notary public, brought in specifically by Darren to finalize his paperwork. Mr. Higgins took his place at the head of the table. He put on his thick reading glasses, cleared his throat, and opened the cream-colored folder. "We are gathered here today to read the last will and testament of Vivian Eleanor Thompson." Mr. Higgins began, his voice dry and formal. "This document was drafted and officially filed 5 years ago. I will spare you the standard legal preamble and skip directly to the distribution of assets as requested by the family." Darren leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, a smug smirk stretching across his face. Tasha reached out and grabbed her brother's arm, her designer bracelets clinking loudly in the quiet room. "Regarding the primary residence, the historic Thompson family estate, located in the Buckhead district," Mr. Higgins read, tracing the lines of paper with his index finger. "I leave this property in its entirety to be divided equally 50-50 between my son Darren Thompson and my daughter Tasha Hayes." Tasha let out a loud, delighted squeal, completely ignoring the solemn nature of the meeting. She slapped the table with her manicured hand. "I told you," she whispered loudly to Chloe. "Half of it is mine. The Airbnb is officially happening." Chloe crossed her arms over her pregnant belly and scowled, but Darren quickly patted her knee to keep her quiet. "Regarding my liquid assets," Mr. Higgins continued, turning the page, "all funds currently held in my primary checking and savings accounts at First National Bank are to be distributed evenly between Darren and Tasha, to be used at their own discretion to further the family legacy." Darren let out a heavy breath of relief. He sat back in his chair, running a hand over his expensive silk tie. He knew those accounts historically held hundreds of thousands of dollars. He had absolutely no idea that Mama Vivian had systematically emptied them months ago, or that his sister had already tried to sue me over the missing funds. He was mentally spending money that did not exist. Mr. Higgins closed the folder and took off his glasses. That concludes the primary distribution of the estate. There are minor personal items listed in the appendix, but the house and the cash accounts are the bulk of the inheritance. Darren immediately turned his attention directly to me. His eyes were wide with malicious, triumphant joy. He looked at me as if I were a piece of dirt he had finally managed to scrape off his shoe. "Did you hear that, Kiara?" Darren asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "Everything. She left everything to her actual bloodline. You wasted 9 grueling months of your life wiping spit off a dying woman's chin, and you get absolutely nothing. Not a single dime. Not a square foot of property." Tasha laughed, a high, grating sound that echoed off the glass walls. "I really hope you enjoyed your little moment of power at the mayor's gala last night, Kiara. Because now that we have the capital, we are going to hire a real legal team to destroy your catering business. Maybe if you beg, I will let you cater our housewarming party. I could use a cheap food truck for the backyard." I looked at Tasha, then at Darren, and finally at Chloe, who was smiling smugly at my supposed misfortune. I did not react to their taunts. I kept my face perfectly still, a blank canvas of cool indifference. DeAndre, sitting at the end of the table, squeezed his eyes shut and visibly flinched at his wife's arrogance. He knew the trap was set, and he was watching them walk right into the jaws of the beast. Darren was not finished. He reached down and picked up a thick leather portfolio he had brought with him. He unzipped it and pulled out a heavy stack of legal documents with colored tabs sticking out of the edges. He tossed the stack across the mahogany table. It slid to a stop right in front of me. "Before we adjourn this meeting, we are going to finalize our own business," Darren announced, his tone shifting from mocking to fiercely commanding. "Those are the finalized divorce papers. My lawyers drafted an ironclad addendum last night after your little stunt in the hallway. Since we are technically still married as of this exact second, I am not taking any chances that a sympathetic judge will try to grant you a percentage of my new inheritance." Darren pointed a rigid finger at the front page of the document. "Read Section 4, Paragraph 2. Read it out loud, Kiara." I picked up the thick stack of papers. The paper felt heavy and expensive. I flipped to the 4th page, finding the section he had aggressively highlighted in yellow marker. "It states that neither party has any claim whatsoever to the other party's inherited current or future assets." I read aloud, my voice calm and perfectly steady. "It specifically waives all rights to alimony, spousal support, and property division regarding any newly acquired wealth." "Exactly!" Darren sneered, leaning across the table like a predator moving in for the kill. "I made sure it is absolutely airtight. You sign this document right now and we sever our financial ties permanently. You walk away with your cheap pots and pans, and you never touch my family's wealth. If you refuse to sign it, I will use my new inheritance to tie you up in litigation for the next decade." I looked down at the highlighted clause. It was a masterpiece of arrogant stupidity. Darren was so completely blinded by his greed, so terrified that I might try to claim half of a house that was actually secretly drowning in massive debt, that he had explicitly instructed his own lawyers to draft a clause that protected my assets just as fiercely as his own. He was building a massive, impenetrable financial wall between us. He had no idea he was locking himself on the poor side of the wall. I looked to my right. Attorney Sterling was watching me, his face an unreadable mask of corporate stoicism. But I saw the microscopic approving nod he gave me. I looked back at Darren, deciding to play reluctant just a tiny bit to make him push for it. "Are you absolutely sure you want to do this, Darren? 11 years of marriage? And you are forcing me to sign away everything with zero financial safety net. You are leaving me with absolutely nothing." Darren scoffed, rolling his eyes in sheer disgust. "You were nothing when I met you, Kiara, and you are going back to being nothing. Sign the damn paper, or I make a phone call right now and your catering trucks get crushed at the impound lot." I let out a soft, defeated sigh that was entirely theatrical. I reached out and picked up the heavy black pen resting on the table. I uncapped it. I placed the tip of the pen on the signature line. I did not hesitate. I pressed down firmly, signing my name with bold, sweeping strokes of thick black ink. Every single letter I wrote felt like a massive weight lifting off my shoulders. With that signature, I was protecting my business. With that signature, I was protecting Mama Vivian's secret empire. I pushed the documents back across the table. Darren snatched them up eagerly as if I had just handed him a winning lottery ticket. He grabbed his own pen and aggressively scrawled his name next to mine on every single required page. He waved his hand at the woman sitting in the corner. The notary public quickly stood up, walked over to the table and collected the documents. She meticulously checked both of our driver's licenses, recorded the transaction in her official ledger, and pulled out her heavy stamp. Thud. The sound of the notary stamp hitting the paper echoed sharply in the quiet room. Thud, thud. It is official, the notary said quietly, organizing the copies. The divorce decree is legally binding and notarized. I will file it with the county courthouse this afternoon. Darren let out a loud, victorious laugh. He grabbed Chloe and pulled her in for a deep, inappropriate kiss, right there in front of the lawyers. Tasha clapped her hands together, radiating pure joy. They had done it. They had successfully evicted me, stripped me of my marital rights, and secured their grand inheritance. Darren looked at me, a cruel, satisfied smile on his face. Now that our business is officially concluded, you can get the hell out of my lawyer's office. You do not belong here anymore, Kiara. I did not stand up. I did not grab my purse. I simply leaned back in my plush leather chair, crossing my arms over my tailored blazer, and offered him a slow, chilling smile that made his victorious laughter suddenly die in his throat. "Oh, Darren," I said softly, "our business is definitely concluded, but this meeting is not over." Before Darren could utter another word, Attorney Sterling stood up. His towering frame commanded the entire room instantly. He adjusted the cuffs of his expensive navy suit, cleared his throat with a loud, booming sound, and reached into his titanium briefcase. He did not pull out a standard legal pad. He pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope securely sealed with dark red wax and stamped with the insignia of his elite corporate law firm. He placed it directly in the center of the mahogany table, right on top of Mr. Higgins' old useless folder. The thick red wax seal on the envelope seemed to glow under the harsh fluorescent lights of the conference room. Attorney Sterling placed his massive hand flat over the envelope, his heavy gold watch glinting. He looked directly at Mr. Higgins, completely ignoring the outrage radiating from Darren's side of the table. "Mr. Higgins." Sterling began, his voice dropping an octave, carrying the absolute weight of a federal judge rendering a final verdict. "The document you just read to this family is entirely void. It was legally superseded by a newly drafted, fully notarized last will and testament executed by Vivian Eleanor Thompson exactly 3 weeks prior to her passing. As her newly appointed corporate counsel, I am here to formally execute the final terms of her estate." Darren leaped out of his chair, slamming his hands flat against the mahogany table. "That is a lie," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Sterling. "My mother did not change her will. She was heavily medicated on morphine for the last month of her life. If she signed anything, Kiara forged it or coerced her into it. This is blatant elder abuse and fraud. I will have you disbarred, and I will have her arrested." Sterling did not even blink. He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a slim silver flash drive, tossing it onto the center of the table. "That drive contains 3 hours of high-definition video footage," Sterling stated coolly. "It features Mrs. Thompson fully lucid and evaluated by 2 independent board-certified psychiatrists who confirmed her absolute mental competency. In the video, she explicitly details her profound disappointment in her biological children, outlines the exact financial betrayal she suffered, and personally signs the new documents while looking directly into the camera. Would you like me to project the video on the screen right now, Mr. Thompson? Or would you prefer to sit down and act like an adult while I read the legal terms?" Darren stared at the flash drive as if it were a live grenade. The color drained entirely from his face. He slowly sank back into his leather chair, his arrogant posture crumbling into a slump of sheer panic. Chloe gripped his arm, her acrylic nails digging into his suit jacket. Attorney Sterling broke the red wax seal with a sharp crack that echoed in the silent room. He pulled out a thick stack of crisp, watermarked legal documents. He did not need reading glasses. His eyes scanned the pages with the speed of a seasoned predator. "Let us begin with the commercial portfolio," Sterling announced. 3 weeks ago, Mrs. Thompson formally transferred ownership of 27 highly lucrative commercial properties located in downtown Atlanta Buckhead and the southern industrial sector. These assets, along with 3 offshore trust funds and her primary liquid capital, totaling roughly $12 million, were placed into a newly formed blind entity named Iron Magnolia Holdings, LLC. Tasha gasped, clutching her diamond necklace. $12 million, she whispered frantically. Mama had $12 million. Sterling ignored her outburst and continued reading. According to the explicitly binding terms of Iron Magnolia Holdings, there is only one sole beneficiary, executive director, and controlling shareholder of the entire trust. Sterling paused, allowing the agonizing suspense to stretch for 3 long, agonizing seconds. He looked up from the paper and locked eyes with Darren. "That sole beneficiary is Kiara Thompson," Sterling declared. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens directly after a massive car crash, before the screaming begins. Darren stopped breathing. Tasha's mouth hung open in shock. Mr. Higgins took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, utterly bewildered by the secret empire his longtime client had hidden from him. "But I am her son," Darren finally choked out his voice, a pathetic high-pitched whine. "I am her blood. She cannot just give away the entire family legacy to a caterer. Oh, she did not give everything to Kiara." Sterling corrected smoothly, turning to the next page of the document. "She did leave a specific inheritance for her biological children, specifically the historic Buckhead estate." Tasha let out a sharp, desperate breath of relief. She turned to Chloe. "Okay, see, we still get the house. We still get the Airbnb. The house is worth at least $2 million on the current market. We can sell it and fight this ridiculous trust in court." I leaned forward, resting my elbows gracefully on the mahogany table. I looked at Tasha with a deeply sympathetic, mocking smile. "You should really let Attorney Sterling finish reading the clause, Tasha." Sterling cleared his throat loudly. Regarding the historic Buckhead estate, Mrs. Thompson did indeed leave the deed in the names of Darren and Tasha. However, over the past 18 months, Mrs. Thompson took out 3 separate high-interest reverse mortgages against the full appraised value of that specific property. She funneled all the extracted cash directly into the Iron Magnolia Holdings Trust. Darren's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated horror as the mathematical reality of what the lawyer was saying finally crashed down on him. "Because Mrs. Thompson is now deceased," Sterling explained, his tone completely devoid of pity. "Those 3 reverse mortgages have immediately defaulted and triggered an acceleration clause. The historic estate is currently completely underwater. The outstanding debt on the property exceeds its current market value by over $500,000. The bank has already initiated formal foreclosure proceedings. You have exactly 30 days to vacate the premises before the federal marshals arrive to seize the property and lock the doors." Tasha screamed. It was not a ladylike gasp. It was a full, visceral scream of absolute terror. She grabbed the edge of the mahogany table, her knuckles turning white. "No," she shrieked, tears instantly ruining her expensive makeup. "No, I put down deposits for the contractors. The kitchen is being gutted on Monday. We do not owe that money." "You inherited the deed," Mrs. Hayes Sterling replied coldly. "Therefore you inherited the debt. I suggest you cancel those contractors immediately. If they rip out the kitchen, the bank will sue you personally for intentionally destroying their collateral." Darren looked like he was going to vomit. He covered his mouth with a trembling hand, staring blindly at the center of the table. He had spent the last 2 weeks strutting around the historic home, bragging about his royal inheritance, demanding I leave my catering equipment behind as rent compensation. He had moved his pregnant mistress into the master suite, promising her a life of luxury. And now he realized the brutal truth. Mama Vivian had not just disinherited him, she had actively weaponized his own greed against him. She knew he would fight to the bitter end for that house, so she hollowed it out from the inside, extracted every single dime of value, handed the money to me, and left him holding a massive ticking financial time bomb. Chloe, sitting next to Darren, began to hyperventilate. Her chest heaved dramatically as she realized the grand lifestyle she had traded her dignity for was completely gone. "Darren," she cried, grabbing his lapels and shaking him. "You told me we were rich. You told me the house was paid off. Where are we going to live? What about the baby?" Darren could not answer her. He was completely paralyzed. His mind finally managed to connect the final devastating dots of the morning. His eyes slowly shifted from the foreclosure documents in Sterling's hands to the divorce decree sitting right in front of him. The divorce decree he had aggressively demanded. The divorce decree he had maliciously drafted. The divorce decree he had eagerly signed just 5 minutes ago in thick black ink. "You signed away your rights," I said softly, leaning back in my chair and delivering the final lethal blow. Darren's head snapped toward me. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and completely devoid of hope. "You made sure your lawyers drafted an ironclad addendum, Darren." I continued, my voice calm and perfectly steady. "You made sure that neither party had any claim whatsoever to the other party's inherited current or future assets. You waived all rights to alimony. You waived all rights to property division. You built a massive, impenetrable financial wall to lock me out of your inheritance." I picked up the fully notarized, legally binding divorce decree and held it up so the harsh fluorescent lights caught the official stamp. "But you locked yourself out of mine," I whispered. "You own half of a $500,000 debt, Darren, and I own $12 million in cash and commercial real estate, including the very ground your little impound lot friend Dexter operates on." Darren let out a guttural, animalistic roar of pure rage. He lunged across the heavy mahogany table, his hands outstretched, aiming directly for my throat. He was going to try and physically tear the documents from my hands, but he never made it across the wood. Attorney Sterling moved with terrifying speed for a man his size. He slammed his massive hand squarely into the center of Darren's chest, violently shoving him backward. Darren crashed heavily into his leather chair, the chair tipping backward and slamming into the glass wall of the conference room with a sickening thud. "Do not even think about it!" Sterling growled, his voice vibrating with barely contained violence. "You lay one finger on my client, and I will personally ensure you spend the next 10 years in a federal penitentiary for assaulting an executive officer of a protected trust. Sit down and shut your mouth." Darren stayed slumped against the glass wall, gasping for air, clutching his chest where Sterling had hit him. He was completely broken. The arrogant corporate executive who had sneered at my cheap pots and pans was gone. He was just a broke, desperate man staring at a massive mountain of debt he could never possibly repay. Tasha was openly weeping now, her face buried in her hands, her diamond necklace tangled in her hair. She looked at her husband desperately, seeking any shred of support. "DeAndre," she sobbed. "DeAndre, please say something. Use the church lawyers. Help us fight this." DeAndre slowly lifted his head. He looked at his crying wife, then he looked at me. He remembered the text messages. He remembered the wire fraud. He remembered the deal we struck in the coffee shop. DeAndre cleared his throat. He did not look at Tasha with love. He looked at her with pure, absolute disgust. Tasha recoiled from her husband's gaze as if she had been physically struck. The last remaining pillar of her carefully constructed support system had just completely crumbled. Her eyes darted wildly around the room, frantic and wide-settling finally on Mr. Higgins at the head of the table. She slammed her hands onto the mahogany wood, her manicured acrylic nails scraping loudly against the polished surface. "This is fraud!" Tasha screamed, her voice breaking into a hysterical, high-pitched shriek that hurt the ears. "This is massive coordinated corporate fraud. Mama did not sign those papers. Kiara forced her to do it. Kiara brought in fake doctors and made a dying woman sign away her life savings while she was highly medicated. Mr. Higgins, you are the family lawyer. Do something, arrest her. Call the police right now and have this fake trust annulled." Mr. Higgins looked at Tasha, his face pale and deeply exhausted. "Mrs. Hayes," he said quietly, his voice trembling slightly with shock. "Attorney Sterling just presented a fully notarized legal document backed by independent board-certified psychiatric evaluations and high-definition video evidence. I have practiced estate law for 40 years. This is not fraud. This is an airtight, legally binding transfer of assets. Your mother deliberately restructured her estate to explicitly exclude you. The reality of Mr. Higgins' words hit Tasha like a runaway freight train. She let out another guttural scream, grabbing a heavy crystal water glass from the center of the table and hurling it blindly toward the glass wall. It shattered into 100 sparkling pieces, the ice water raining down on the plush corporate carpet. Darren, who had been slouched against the wall, desperately catching his breath, suddenly snapped. The sheer, overwhelming humiliation of being completely outsmarted by the woman he had treated like an unpaid servant for 11 years broke whatever fragile sanity he had left. His eyes rolled back with a feral, terrifying intensity. He let out a wordless roar of pure, unadulterated hatred and launched himself across the massive mahogany table. He scrambled over the polished wood, kicking aside legal folders and knocking over heavy leather chairs, his hands outstretched like rigid claws aiming directly for my throat. "I am going to kill you," Darren raged, spit flying from his lips as his face twisted into a demonic mask. "I am going to wring your neck." I did not even flinch. I did not raise my hands to protect myself. I simply sat there in my tailored black suit, perfectly still, watching him act like a rabid animal. Before Darren could even cross the midpoint of the long table, the heavy double doors of the conference room burst open. Attorney Sterling had pressed a silent emergency panic button under the edge of the table the exact moment Darren had initially lunged. 4 massive, heavily armored building security guards flooded into the room. They grabbed Darren mid-leap, slamming him violently face first onto the mahogany wood. Darren thrashed and kicked, screaming vicious obscenities, but the guards easily pinned his arms securely behind his back, pressing their heavy weight against him. His expensive silk tie was ruined, his custom suit jacket was torn at the shoulder seam, and his face was pressed awkwardly against the very divorce decree he had gleefully signed just 10 minutes earlier. "Get off me!" Darren shouted, struggling helplessly against the combined strength of the security detail. "I own this building." "Actually, I own this building," I corrected him calmly, adjusting the lapels of my blazer. "And you are currently trespassing on my commercial property." In the corner of the room, Chloe finally cracked. The sudden physical violence combined with the catastrophic financial revelation pushed her pregnant body into a severe panic attack. She collapsed onto her knees, clutching her massive belly, gasping frantically for air. Her expensive designer handbag spilled onto the floor, scattering luxury cosmetics and baby boutique receipts everywhere. "He has no money," Chloe wailed, rocking back and forth on the carpet while tears streamed down her perfectly contoured face. "He told me he was a millionaire. He told me the historic house was completely paid off. We have a baby coming in 4 weeks. Where are we going to live? How am I going to pay the private hospital bills?" "Darren, you lied to me. You are completely broke. You owe $500,000 to the bank." Darren ignored her desperate cries, his face turning dark red with exertion as he continued to fight the security guards in a pathetic display of lost dominance. The room was a symphony of complete and total destruction. Tasha was sobbing uncontrollably into her hands, her emerald dress crumpled. Darren was pinned to a table like a common street criminal. Chloe was hyperventilating loudly on the floor. DeAndre was staring blankly at the wall, mentally calculating exactly how fast he needed to file for divorce to save his pastoral career. I surveyed the wreckage of the Thompson family. They had demanded this meeting. They had demanded I sign away my marital rights. They had brought me here to humiliate me and watch me walk away with nothing. It was time to deliver the final payload. I slowly reached into my oversized leather tote bag and pulled out the small black burner phone. I placed it squarely in the center of the mahogany table right next to Mama Vivian's new trust documents. I unlocked the screen and navigated smoothly to the saved audio files. I turned the media volume up to the absolute maximum setting. I need everyone to be completely quiet for just 2 minutes. I announced, my voice slicing through the chaotic room with icy, undeniable precision. The commanding authority in my tone caught them off guard. Tasha stopped sobbing. Chloe muffled her frantic gasps. Even Darren stopped struggling against the heavy security guards, turning his head slightly to look at the small black device resting on the wood. Mama Vivian left me more than just a massive real estate portfolio. I explained, looking directly into Darren's panicked, bloodshot eyes. She also left me her personal insurance policy. You see, she knew you would try to contest the new will. She knew you would scream fraud and play the innocent victims. So she hired a highly elite private investigator during her final months. She mirrored your text messages. She audited your hidden bank accounts. And she recorded your phone calls. Darren's eyes widened to the size of saucers. No, he whispered hoarsely, struggling weakly against the guards again as true terror finally set in. Kiara, do not do this. I pressed play. The audio quality was incredibly crisp and clear. It was a recorded phone conversation from exactly 5 months ago. The voices echoing through the penthouse conference room were unmistakable. It was Darren and Tasha. Darren's recorded voice played first, sounding deeply annoyed and casually cruel. The oncologist called today. She said the latest round of chemo completely failed. The cancer is in her liver now. Tasha's recorded voice replied immediately, entirely devoid of any sadness or basic human empathy. Finally, did the doctor give a timeline? How much longer is this going to drag out? I am trying to put a down payment on a new condo in Miami, but I need my half of the estate cash to clear the underwriting process. Hopefully, she does not make it past Thanksgiving. I cannot guarantee Thanksgiving. Darren's voice sighed over the phone. But she is definitely fading fast. Just make sure Kiara keeps playing the devoted little nurse. I need her washing the sheets and administering the heavy meds, so I do not have to pay for 24-hour private hospice care. That stuff costs thousands a week. I am not wasting my inheritance on medical bills. Tasha laughed on the recording. It was a cold, heartless, demonic sound. Just keep promising the caterer that you will take her on a romantic vacation when this is all over. She is so desperate for your attention, she will literally scrub the floors with a toothbrush. As soon as Mama flatlines, we evict the maid, sell the assets, and split the cash. Just make sure the paperwork is ready, Darren. I need that money. Do not worry about it. Darren's recorded voice chuckled darkly. Kiara will clean up the mess and we will clean out the bank accounts. I will talk to you later. I reached out and pressed stop on the burner phone. The recording ended, but the horrific, damning words seemed to hang heavily in the air, vibrating against the glass walls. The sheer sociopathic cruelty of their private conversation was impossible to deny or spin. They had actively wished for their mother's death. They had calculated the exact financial benefit of her early demise. They had laughed about using my grief as unpaid medical labor. Nobody spoke. The silence was heavier than lead. Chloe stared up at Darren from the floor, her face twisted in absolute disgust. Even she, a woman who had willingly engaged in a long-term affair with a married man, was visibly repulsed by the staggering reality of his true character. He was not a wealthy, misunderstood husband. He was a monster who prayed for his own mother to die so he could steal her money. Tasha shrank back into her expensive leather chair, wrapping her arms tightly around herself. She could not look at anyone. The glamorous, arrogant socialite who loved to preach at church galas was entirely gone, replaced by a pathetic, exposed fraud whose own words had just sealed her fate. At the head of the table, Mr. Higgins slowly stood up. The elderly family lawyer looked physically ill. He had known Darren and Tasha since they were children playing in the historic Buckhead estate. He had drafted their college trust funds. He had handled their minor legal troubles over the years. But he had never seen the true rotten core of their souls until this exact moment. Mr. Higgins reached down and closed his cream-colored folder. He meticulously stacked his legal pads and placed them inside his worn leather briefcase. He snapped the heavy brass locks shut with a loud final click that echoed like a gunshot. Mr. Higgins Darren pleaded from the table, his voice muffled against the wood. You have to help me fight this. We have been clients for decades. You owe my family. Mr. Higgins looked down at Darren, his wrinkled face a mask of profound sorrow and intense professional disgust. I have represented the Thompson family for 40 years, Mr. Higgins said, his voice shaking with righteous, undeniable anger. I served your grandfather. I served your mother. They were honorable, hardworking people who built a legacy out of absolutely nothing. But looking at you two right now, hearing what you said about the woman who gave you life, I see absolutely none of their grace. You are a complete disgrace to the Thompson name. Mr. Higgins picked up his briefcase and walked toward the heavy double doors. He stopped right behind Tasha's chair and looked back at the ruined room. As of this exact moment, I am formally withdrawing as legal counsel for Darren Thompson and Tasha Hayes, Mr. Higgins announced clearly. I will not represent you in the upcoming foreclosure proceedings. I will not represent you in any future civil disputes. Do not call my office. Do not contact my secretaries. You are entirely on your own. May God have mercy on your miserable souls. Because the banking institutions certainly will not. With that final devastating declaration, Mr. Higgins turned on his heel and walked out of the conference room, letting the heavy doors swing shut behind him. The heavy double doors clicked shut behind Mr. Higgins, sealing the remaining occupants inside the glass-walled penthouse conference room. The atmosphere was completely poisoned heavy with the toxic fallout of ruined lives and shattered egos. Tasha sat frozen in her expensive leather chair, her breath hitching in her throat, her eyes fixed on the empty space where her lifelong family lawyer had just stood. She was entirely untethered, drifting in a sudden terrifying reality where her name, her status, and her arrogant demands meant absolutely nothing. Then the final domino began to fall. DeAndre slowly stood up from his chair at the far end of the mahogany table. He reached up and meticulously buttoned his charcoal gray suit jacket, smoothing the lapels with unnerving precision. He did not look like a man whose wife was in deep distress. He looked like a man stepping up to a pulpit to deliver a fire and brimstone sermon. Tasha turned her tear-streaked face toward him, her eyes wide with a desperate childlike hope. "DeAndre," she sobbed, reaching a trembling hand out in his direction. "Please, we have to call the church elders. We have to hire a new legal team. We can fight this trust. We can prove she manipulated Mama." DeAndre looked down at her outstretched hand, but he did not take it. Instead, he took a deliberate step backward, physically distancing himself from her. "Do not drag my church into your filthy, greedy mess," Tasha DeAndre boomed, his deep pastoral voice echoing off the glass walls with absolute unforgiving authority. "I sit before the Lord and my congregation every single Sunday and preach about the dangers of greed, deception, and the love of money, and all this time the devil was sleeping right next to me in my own bed." Tasha flinched, pulling her hand back as if he had burned her. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "I am talking about the $80,000 you stole from the Youth Ministry Expansion Fund," DeAndre roared, pointing a rigid, accusatory finger directly at her face. "I am talking about the federal wire fraud you committed to buy a secret suburban townhouse for your brother's pregnant mistress. I am talking about the $20,000 Cartier diamond necklace you are wearing right now, paid for with money meant to feed impoverished children in our community." Darren, who was still pinned to the table by the security guards, lifted his head in shock. He had no idea DeAndre knew about the townhouse money. He looked wildly at his sister, realizing the full extent of the evidence I possessed. "You recorded us," Tasha stammered, looking frantically between DeAndre and the small black burner phone resting on the table. "DeAndre, please listen to me. I only did it to help Darren. I was going to put the money back as soon as we got Mama's inheritance. It was just a temporary loan. I did it for our family." "You did it for yourself," DeAndre spat back, his face twisted in pure disgust. "You jeopardized my entire career. You risked my freedom. The senior board has already initiated an emergency audit of all financial accounts. When they find the missing funds, they will call the authorities. I will not allow you to drag my name and my ministry down into a federal prison cell with you." DeAndre reached into his inner suit pocket and pulled out a crisp white envelope. He tossed it onto the mahogany table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped right next to Tasha's trembling hands. "My attorneys drafted those up yesterday afternoon," DeAndre stated coldly. "Those are formal divorce papers. I am citing irreconcilable differences and extreme financial misconduct. I have already packed all of your belongings into garbage bags, just like the ones you threw at Kiara. They are currently sitting on the front porch of the parsonage. Do not come back to my house, Tasha. Do not call my phone. You are completely dead to me." Tasha let out a harrowing, soul-crushing wail. She picked up the envelope with shaking hands, staring at the legal seal as if it were a venomous snake. She had walked into this room expecting to inherit half of a multi-million-dollar estate and secure her absolute financial independence. Instead, she was leaving with $500,000 in inherited debt, a looming federal fraud investigation, and a ruined marriage. She had lost absolutely everything. DeAndre did not offer her a single ounce of comfort. He turned to me, gave a stiff, highly formal nod of acknowledgement, and walked straight out of the conference room without ever looking back at his weeping wife. Across the room, Chloe was still on her knees, her hands pressed tightly against her pregnant belly. She had listened to the entire exchange. She had heard the recording of Darren wishing for his mother's death. She had heard the lawyer confirm that the historic house was completely underwater. The lavish, wealthy lifestyle Darren had promised her was nothing but an elaborate, devastating illusion. Chloe grabbed the edge of the table and pulled her heavy body up from the floor. Her designer maternity dress was wrinkled, and her makeup was completely ruined, but her eyes burned with a fierce, absolute clarity. She looked down at Darren. The security guards had finally released their tight grip, allowing him to sit up. He rubbed his bruised shoulders, looking up at Chloe with a pathetic, desperate expression. Chloe. Baby Darren pleaded, his voice hoarse and broken. Please, we can figure this out. I can get a loan. I can talk to the bank. We can fight Kiara in court and get the money back. I promise you I will take care of you and our son. Chloe stared at him, her lip curling in profound repulsion. You are a disgusting, broke, pathetic liar, she hissed, her voice trembling with intense rage. You told me you owned that historic house. You told me your mother was leaving you millions of dollars. You made me quit my job to move into a townhouse that your sister bought with stolen church money. You used me, Darren. You used me just like you used your ex-wife. I did everything for us. Darren cried, genuine tears finally spilling over his eyelashes and running down his cheeks. I did it so we could have a perfect life together. You did it because you are a greedy, selfish monster, Chloe yelled, her voice echoing loudly in the spacious room. You wished your own mother dead for a paycheck that did not even exist. You are $500,000 in debt, Darren. You have no house, you have no money, and you certainly do not have a family anymore. I am not raising my son in a homeless shelter because his father is a complete failure. Chloe reached down and grabbed her left hand. She aggressively yanked the massive 3-carat diamond engagement ring off her finger. The ring Darren had bought using the money he had secretly siphoned from his mother's accounts before they were frozen. She threw the heavy diamond directly at his face. The ring hit Darren squarely in the chest and bounced off, landing on the mahogany table with a sharp metallic clatter. Do not ever contact me again, Chloe commanded, picking up her designer handbag from the floor. If you try to come near me or this baby, I will file a restraining order so fast it will make your head spin. Have a nice life paying off your mother's debt, you broke loser. Chloe turned around and waddled as fast as her 8-month pregnant body would allow, pushing her way through the heavy double doors and disappearing into the elevator lobby. Darren completely shattered. He slumped forward, burying his face in his arms on the mahogany table, and began to weep. It was not a quiet, dignified cry. It was the loud, ugly, uncontrollable sobbing of a man who realized he had systematically destroyed his entire life with his own 2 hands. He had thrown away a fiercely loyal wife, a comfortable life, and his family's respect, all for a hollow fantasy of unearned wealth that had just evaporated into thin air. Tasha was slumped in her chair next to him, staring blankly at the wall, completely catatonic. The golden child and the prodigal son sitting side by side in the ruins of their arrogance, drowning in the massive debt their mother had purposefully buried them under. The symphony of destruction was finally over. The final note had been played perfectly. I looked at Attorney Sterling. He was calmly packing the trust documents back into his titanium briefcase, utterly unfazed by the emotional carnage surrounding us. He snapped the locks shut, picked up his briefcase, and stood tall. I think our business here is fully concluded, Ms. Thompson Sterling said smoothly, offering me a polite smile. I reached out and picked up the black burner phone, dropping it securely into my oversized leather tote bag. I stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored black blazer. I felt incredibly light. The heavy, suffocating weight of the Thompson family expectations had completely vanished from my shoulders. I was no longer the unappreciated caterer. I was no longer the disrespected wife. I was the sole executive director of a multi-million-dollar empire. I looked down at Darren's weeping form one last time. I did not feel an ounce of pity. He was reaping the exact harvest he had so maliciously planted. "Enjoy your inheritance, Darren," I said softly, my words cutting through his loud sobs. "Make sure you pack up your things before the federal marshals arrive to change the locks." I turned around and walked away. My 5-inch black stilettos clicked a steady, triumphant rhythm against the polished floor. I did not look back at the broken man crying on the table. I did not look back at the ruined woman staring blankly at her divorce papers. I pushed through the heavy glass doors, walked across the pristine waiting room, and stepped into the waiting elevator. The doors slid shut, cutting off the sounds of Darren's weeping entirely. I rode the elevator down to the ground floor, stepping out into the bright, warm Atlanta sunshine. A sleek black chauffeured SUV was idling at the curb arranged by Attorney Sterling's office. The driver immediately stepped out and opened the rear door for me with a respectful nod. I slid into the luxurious leather seat, placing my designer tote bag next to me. The heavy doors closed, shutting out the noise of the busy city traffic. It was incredibly peaceful inside the cabin, but I had one final piece of business to handle before I could truly celebrate. I reached into my purse and pulled out my personal cell phone. I scrolled through my contacts and found the direct emergency line for Ronald Henderson, the bank manager I had confronted just a few days prior. I pressed call. He answered on the first ring, his voice dripping with nervous submission. "Ms. Thompson, what can I do for you today?" "Ronald." I began, my voice perfectly calm and completely devoid of mercy. "I am reviewing the portfolio for Iron Magnolia Holdings. I see that your bank holds the 3 reverse mortgages on the historic Thompson property in Buckhead." "Yes, ma'am," Ronald replied quickly. "Those mortgages defaulted upon Vivian's passing. The standard grace period is 30 days before we begin the formal foreclosure process." I leaned back against the plush leather seat, watching the city skyline roll by through the tinted windows. "I am the sole beneficiary of the estate, Ronald, and I am officially waiving the 30-day grace period. The current occupants of that house are hostile and pose a severe risk of causing intentional property damage to your collateral. I want you to bypass the warning notices. Call the federal marshals and initiate an immediate emergency foreclosure lockdown." There was a brief pause on the line. "Are you absolutely sure, Ms. Thompson? The marshals will go over there and physically throw them out onto the street today." I smiled, a cool, satisfied expression settling over my face. "I am absolutely sure, Ronald. Pull the plug." I ended the call, dropping the phone back into my purse. I closed my eyes, letting the smooth motion of the vehicle carry me forward into my new, brilliant reality. Darren and Tasha wanted me out of the house. They wanted me to pack my bags and leave. Now they were going to learn exactly what it felt like to be dragged out onto the front lawn with nothing but the clothes on their backs. The war was officially over, and the caterer had taken the entire kingdom. Exactly 1 year later, that kingdom had grown into an empire. The bright, warm spring sun washed over the massive, newly constructed building in the heart of downtown Atlanta. The sleek glass and steel facade gleamed, reflecting the vibrant energy of the city. Carved deeply into the polished marble above the main entrance were the words, "The Vivian Thompson Culinary Institute." I stood on the wide front steps, surrounded by hundreds of cheering people. I was not wearing morning black today. I wore a striking, impeccably tailored, pristine white suit, symbolizing a complete and total rebirth. To my left stood the mayor of Atlanta, beaming with genuine pride. To my right stood my loyal sous chef, who was now the fully salaried executive director of Soul and Spice Catering. Behind me were 50 young, brilliant Black entrepreneurs, the inaugural class of the Institute. Thanks to the Iron Magnolia Holdings Trust, every single one of them was receiving a full, comprehensive scholarship and a small business grant to launch their own culinary dreams. The mayor handed me a pair of oversized ceremonial golden scissors. The press cameras flashed brilliantly as I grabbed the thick red ribbon stretched across the entrance. I looked out at the massive crowd, feeling a profound, overwhelming sense of peace. I squeezed the handles, the blades sliced cleanly through the fabric, and the crowd erupted into a deafening roar of applause. As I smiled for the photographs, my mind briefly wandered to the people who were noticeably absent from this triumphant celebration, the people who had tried so desperately to bury me. The federal marshals had not hesitated on the day of the will reading. Just 2 hours after I made that phone call from my chauffeured SUV, they descended upon the historic Buckhead estate. Darren and Tasha were forcibly escorted off the property in front of all their wealthy, judgmental neighbors. They were not allowed to pack boxes. They were not allowed to call moving trucks. They were simply thrown out onto the manicured lawn exactly the way they had threatened to throw me out. The fallout over the past 12 months had been absolute and merciless. Tasha's divorce from DeAndre was incredibly swift. Desperate to save his own reputation, DeAndre fully cooperated with the church elders and the financial authorities. Tasha narrowly avoided federal prison by taking a brutal plea deal that required her to pay back every single stolen dime with massive interest. The government seized her bank accounts, auctioned off her Cartier jewelry, and liquidated her entire designer wardrobe. Today, the former golden child of the Thompson family lives in a cramped, unair-conditioned studio apartment located directly above a noisy 24-hour laundromat on the outskirts of the city. The ultimate crushing irony is her new profession. To pay her court-ordered restitution, Tasha works the grueling night shift as a basic orderly at an underfunded public nursing home. The woman who cruelly mocked me for washing her dying mother's bedpans is now forced to empty them for minimum wage, stripped of her arrogance, her wealth, and her church royalty status. Darren fared even worse. The massive $500,000 debt from the defaulted reverse mortgages completely destroyed his credit and forced him into a highly restrictive, agonizing bankruptcy. The elite corporate financial firm he worked for fired him the exact second the scandal became public knowledge. Chloe, true to her word, vanished from his life completely. She took him to family court the moment their son was born, securing a massive, inescapable monthly child support judgment that Darren could not possibly afford. Now the arrogant, tailored executive who once tried to steal my commercial kitchen works a grueling manual labor job just to avoid sitting in a county jail cell for unpaid support. He wears a stained polyester uniform and works the overnight shift at a massive commercial shipping warehouse. He spends his nights manually loading heavy wooden pallets onto the exact same kind of industrial delivery trucks he once paid a corrupt towing company to steal from me. Every time his meager paycheck hits his account, the state garnishes it entirely, leaving him with barely enough money to buy groceries. They thought they could use me. They thought they could break me. But they severely underestimated the strength of a woman who knows exactly how to survive in the dark. I stepped up to the wooden podium set up on the institute steps, adjusting the microphone. The cheering crowd slowly quieted down, waiting for my inaugural address. I looked down at the faces of the young women in the front row. They reminded me so much of myself just a few years ago. Tired, hardworking, and hungry for a real opportunity. Thank you all for being here today. I began, my voice carrying clearly across the plaza. We hear the term generational wealth used very often in our community. We think it means inheriting a paid-off house, or a massive trust fund, or a heavy diamond necklace. We are taught to measure our legacy by the things we can put a price tag on, but the woman who funded this entire institute, Vivian Thompson, taught me a very different lesson in her final days. I gripped the edges of the podium, speaking straight from my heart. Generational wealth is not just about the money left behind. It is about the grit. It is about the recipes passed down from grandmother to mother to daughter. It is about the intense, calloused resilience required to build an empire from absolute scratch. Vivian Thompson knew that true wealth could not be handed to people who were greedy, entitled, and lazy. True wealth belongs to the people who actually put in the work. The people who are not afraid to get their hands dirty. I smiled, remembering the heavy stoneware jar in the dark basement. Sometimes the greatest gifts are hidden in the places people overlook. They are buried under the heavy burdens we are forced to carry. If you are out there working hard, quietly building your own table because your family refused to give you a seat at theirs, I want you to know that your labor is not in vain. Keep your head down. Keep your hands busy. Protect your peace and guard your crown. Because when the truth finally comes to light, the ones who did the real work will always inherit the kingdom. Thank you, Atlanta. I called out, raising my hand as the crowd erupted into another massive wave of applause. Welcome to the future of soul and spice. I stepped away from the podium, feeling the warm sun on my face. The heavy chapters of my past were officially closed. The future was unwritten, incredibly bright, and entirely mine. If my story resonated with you today, please hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family members who tried to take advantage of your hard work? How did you build your own success after they tried to tear you down? Share your experiences and remember, the best revenge is always massive, undeniable success. Thank you for listening and stay strong.